At 12:13 a.m., my phone vibrated in the dark. My son, an FBI agent, was whispering, but his voice shook. "Turn off every light, go to the attic, lock the door. Don't let them know you're awake." The call ended. No explanation. I moved without thinking. Lights out, door locked, breath held. Through a narrow crack in the attic floor, I watched my own living room below. What unfolded in that quiet house didn't just frighten me. It shattered the last illusion I had about the people I called family. Thank you for being here with me. Before we step into this story, I'd truly love to know where you're watching from. Drop your city or country in the comments so we can connect across the miles. Your presence and support mean more than you realize. And just a quick note before we begin, this story includes fictionalized elements crafted for awareness, education, and storytelling impact. Any resemblance to actual people or places is purely coincidental, but the message behind it carries meaning worth reflecting on. Now, let's begin. My name is Henry Shaw. I am 67 years old, and for 42 of those years, I have restored damaged paintings in the Hillcrest neighborhood of Willowdale. People bring me what time has bruised torn canvases, smoke-darkened portraits, landscapes cracked by heat and neglect, and they trust me to return them to life, piece by piece, brushstroke by brushstroke. I study every fracture, every subtle shift in pigment, until I understand where the damage began. It is slow work, patient work, the kind of work that trains your eye to notice what others overlook, the faint inconsistency in color, the hairline crack that doesn't belong. I never imagined those same skills would one day be the only thing standing between me and ruin. I live in a Victorian house on Maple Street, tall ceilings, trimmed in crown molding polished banisters, worn smooth by decades of hands. My wife Helen loved this house. She used to say the morning light through the east-facing windows was perfect for painting soft and forgiving, like a blessing. We bought the place 30 years ago, back when the neighborhood was still finding its footing. We raised our 2 children here, watched the oak trees in the yard stretch higher each year until their branches cast wide shade across the porch. 8 months ago, Helen lost her battle with cancer. It happened faster than either of us were prepared for. After the funeral, the house felt cavernous, too quiet. Every room echoed with her absence. I avoided the bedroom for weeks. Even the studio felt different without her footsteps in the hallway. Our daughter Claire noticed the change in me. She had always been perceptive, even as a child. I remember her standing in the doorway of my studio when she was small, watching me restore a cracked oil painting, her big eyes absorbing every detail. She had that gift, seeing what others missed. 6 months ago, she came to the house with her husband Cameron and an offer that sounded like kindness. We sat at the kitchen table, the autumn sun slanting through Helen's beloved east windows. Claire reached across and took my hand, her grip warm and steady. "Dad, you shouldn't be alone in this big house," she said softly. "Cameron and I have been talking. Our lease is ending anyway. What if we moved in with you for a while? We could help out, keep you company. You're not getting any younger." I should have paid more attention to that last sentence. You're not getting any younger. But loneliness makes a man ignore warning signs. She was my daughter. The idea of laughter in the hallways again felt like oxygen. Cameron offered a reassuring smile. "We'll handle everything, Henry. Yard work, maintenance bills. You've worked hard your whole life. It's time to take it easy." So, I agreed. They moved in the following week. At first, it felt like relief. Claire cooked dinner most nights. Cameron sorted through stacks of unpaid bills I had neglected during Helen's illness. They were attentive, almost excessively so. If I paused too long in a room, one of them appeared at my shoulder. "Need anything?" "Dad. Feeling okay? Did you take your vitamins?" The vitamins. That was the first brushstroke in a picture I didn't yet recognize. On their first night in the house, Claire brought a small white pill cupped in her palm. "The doctor prescribed these," she said gently. "They'll help with your memory, keep you sharp." I did not recall visiting any doctor. I did not remember any prescription. But grief had left my thoughts muddled. Claire seemed certain, concerned, loving. I swallowed the pill with a glass of water. The next evening, she brought another. Sometimes Cameron delivered it, instead his tone light. "Doctor's orders," he would say. "These will help." But I did not feel helped. I felt dulled, as if a veil had settled over my mind. Thoughts that once moved cleanly now dragged thick and slow. I would walk into my studio and stand there unable to remember why. I would begin a sentence and lose it halfway through. Paintings I had studied for years seemed unfamiliar, as though another man had restored them. The confusion frightened me more than I allowed myself to admit. Perhaps they were right. Perhaps age had finally caught up with me. Perhaps I was slipping. Then the visions began. One night I woke to use the bathroom. The house was dark and still. As I stepped into the hallway, I saw her. Helen. She stood in the corner of our bedroom, wearing the blue dress we had buried her in. Her expression was not angry, not joyful, only unbearably sad. My heart lurched in my chest. I blinked hard, rubbed my eyes. She remained. The hem of her dress seemed to move, though there was no breeze. "Helen," I whispered. She did not speak. She only watched me. A hand gripped my arm. I turned and found Claire beside me. "Dad, are you okay?" When I looked back, the corner was empty. I saw... The words would not form. How do you confess to your daughter that you have seen her dead mother standing in the shadows? Claire guided me to bed, her face arranged in the patient concern. "You were dreaming, Dad. The mind plays tricks at night. That's why rest is important. And your vitamins." She tucked the blanket around me as if I were a child. The following morning, everything felt distant. Sound seemed muffled, light too bright. I moved through the kitchen as though underwater. Claire and Cameron had already left for work. I reached for the coffee filters and accidentally knocked a stack of papers from the counter. They scattered across the tile. I crouched down to collect them, my knees stiff, and one page caught my attention. It bore the letterhead of a facility I had never heard of, Evergreen Behavioral Center. At the top was my name, Henry Shaw, age 67. Below it was a list of boxes: delusions, hallucinations, paranoia, memory loss, inability to care for self, danger to self or others. None were checked yet. The form waited blank, expectant, but every personal detail had already been filled in. My address, my birth date, even my social security number. Someone had prepared this. Someone intended to have me evaluated, declared incompetent. I remained kneeling on the kitchen floor, the morning light pouring through Helen's east windows. The coffee machine gurgled behind me, ordinary and indifferent, while the world I trusted tilted dangerously off balance. The next morning, I found something even worse. A psychiatric evaluation form, with my name on it. I was not always this wary of my own daughter. There was a time when Claire was the center of my world, when her laughter moved through this house like sunlight through stained glass. I can still see her at 8 years old, perched on the tall wooden stool in my studio, her legs swinging as she watched me work on a damaged oil painting. It had been donated to a school fundraiser, a 19th century portrait, slashed clean through the subject's face. Most people would have called it ruin beyond repair, but Claire studied it with solemn focus, as if she could already see what it might become. She handed me brushes and palette knives with the seriousness of a surgical assistant. When I finally blended the final stroke and erased the evidence of that violent tear, she clapped her small hands together in delight. "Daddy, why do you fix broken paintings?" She asked, her eyes wide with that pure curiosity. Only children possess the kind that sees wonder everywhere. I set my brush aside and lifted her onto my lap. "Because everything deserves a second chance, sweetheart," I told her. "Even broken things can become beautiful again, if someone cares enough to try." She wrapped her arms around my neck and whispered, "You're the best daddy in the whole world." I believed her. God forgive me, I believed every word. But childhood does not stay still. Claire grew up. She left for college, built her own life. She came home for holidays called most Sundays, sent photos from trips with friends, smiling in front of beaches, city skylines, mountain trails. Helen and I would sit together at the kitchen table, scrolling through those pictures, pride swelling in our chests. Our little girl had become capable, independent, accomplished. 2 years ago, Claire called with excitement in her voice. "I met someone," she said. "His name is Cameron Drake." From the way she described him, you would have thought he had personally rearranged the stars in her sky. "He was charming," she said. "Successful. A consultant in real estate investment. Confident without arrogance. Ambitious, but grounded. He had easy answers for everything, and a smile so polished it could sell ice in winter." We met him a month later. He arrived with a firm handshake and perfect posture, dressed in a tailored jacket that probably cost more than my first car. He complimented Helen's cooking, admired my studio, asked thoughtful questions about my restoration work. They married the following summer in a small ceremony at the Botanical Gardens. Claire looked radiant beneath an arch of white roses. Cameron stood beside her in an expensive suit, his expression composed and confident. After the ceremony, he clasped my hand. "I'll take good care of her, Henry," he said, his grip steady. "She's everything to me." I wanted to believe him, and at the time, I did. He was attentive to Claire, polite to Helen, and me always ready with a compliment. But looking back now, I can see what I missed. The way he gently redirected conversations toward finances. The way he asked about property values in Hillcrest. The subtle inquiries about my retirement accounts, my investment portfolio, the worth of my art collection. He spoke often about rising healthcare costs for people our age. He suggested that Helen and I should begin planning for the future sooner rather than later. At the time, it seemed practical, responsible. Now I see it as reconnaissance, but grief clouds judgment. 8 months before they moved into my house, cancer took Helen from me. It happened with brutal speed. 1 week, she was complaining about fatigue. 6 weeks later, I stood in a quiet funeral home selecting a casket. After she was gone, the house changed. It no longer felt like shelter. It felt like a museum of memory. Every room carried her voice. Every hallway echoed her absence. I moved through those months, like a man underwater, muted, distant, half aware. I stopped accepting restoration projects, let unopened mail accumulate on the kitchen counter, forgot to return phone calls. Ryan, my son, called every few days from wherever the FBI had stationed him. His voice always carried tension. "Dad, are you okay?" "I'm fine," I would say. But I wasn't. He was too far away to help, and I was too numb to ask for it. That was when Claire began visiting more frequently. She brought groceries, cooked meals I barely touched, sat beside me in the living room while we watched television neither of us truly followed. She told me I looked thinner, tired, that the house was too much for one person. "You shouldn't be alone here," she would say gently. Then came the afternoon 6 months ago now, when she arrived with Cameron and an idea I should have questioned more carefully. We sat in the living room, sunlight filtered through the curtains. Claire reached for my hand. "Dad, Cameron and I have been talking. You need family around you. This house is big and you're here alone. What if something happened?" Cameron leaned forward, concern arranged neatly across his face. "We'd love to move in temporarily, Henry. Just until you feel steady again. We'll handle the yard, the bills, everything. Make sure you're eating right, taking your medications." Medications. I wasn't on any medications, but I was tired. Tired of empty rooms. Tired of silence. "Are you sure?" I asked. "I don't want to be a burden." "You could never be a burden," Claire replied quickly. "You took care of me my whole life. Let me take care of you now." Loneliness is persuasive. So I said yes. I handed them keys to my home, my sanctuary, my last connection to Helen. They moved in on a cool Saturday morning in March. The house filled with motion again, suitcases rolling across hardwood, cabinets opening and closing, laughter drifting down hallways. The first week felt almost comforting. I was no longer eating alone. Morning coffee came with conversation. For a brief time, I felt grateful. Then the subtle shifts began. Cameron offered to organize my bills. "Just to make things easier," he said. Within days, he was writing checks from my account, logging into my online banking, explaining that he was taking stress off my plate. Claire began sorting through my medicine cabinet. "These are outdated," she would say, discarding bottles I didn't even remember using. Soon she was bringing me pills in the morning and pills at night, each delivered with that same soft, reassuring smile. And I began to feel different. Fog settled over my thoughts. Conversations felt distant. Words slipped away mid-sentence. It was as if my own mind were wrapped in gauze. Within weeks, Cameron started installing security cameras. He did it methodically. The front door first for package theft, then the living room in case you fall, then the hallway to monitor if you wander at night. "For your safety," he would say, drilling another small black lens into the wall. "At your age, we can't be too careful." I stood there watching him bore holes into the walls Helen had carefully painted, and I told myself it was thoughtful, protective, loving. I told myself they cared. I did not yet understand that those small black lenses were not there to protect me. They were there to watch me, in my own home. It took me several days to grasp just how many cameras Cameron had installed. He hadn't done it all at once. He had worked slowly, carefully, adding one small black lens at a time, as if weaving threads of a net around me. The first one I noticed was in the living room, mounted high in the corner near the crown molding. Cameron had pointed it out casually, almost proudly. "Just a precaution, Dad," he said. "You know, in case anything happens." At the time, I nodded. It seemed reasonable enough. I was 67. Helen was gone. The house was large and filled with stairs. Perhaps a little extra security wasn't a bad idea. But then I found another. This one was in the hallway, positioned to capture the entire length from the bedrooms to the stairs. A few days later, I spotted one in the kitchen angled carefully toward the stove and the sink. And then one evening, I discovered a fourth in the upstairs bathroom. It was tucked near the edge of the mirror frame, almost invisible unless you were looking for it. That one made my stomach twist. I stood in the bathroom doorway for a long time, staring at the tiny black lens. Something cold and heavy settled in my chest. Cameras in the living room might be understandable. Cameras at the front door, even the hallway, those could be rationalized. But here, in the bathroom. When I finally confronted Cameron about it, he didn't hesitate. "Dad, at your age, what if you fall?" he asked, his voice calm and measured. "What if you have a dizzy spell in the shower? We need to be able to help you." His tone was patient, almost indulgent, the tone one uses with a child who doesn't quite understand. I wanted to protest. I wanted to tell him that I was still capable of standing upright without supervision, but the words felt tangled somewhere behind the haze that had been clouding my mind for weeks. My thoughts were sluggish, my reactions delayed, so I said nothing. It wasn't until later that evening that another realization struck me. There were no cameras in Cameron and Claire's bedroom, none in Claire's private bathroom either. I had passed their doorway on my way to the attic studio and glanced inside. No lenses in the corners, no faint blinking lights, no silent watchers. I stood at the bottom of the attic stairs and let that sink in. They were watching me everywhere, except in the spaces they controlled. The next morning, I asked Cameron about the attic. He didn't miss a beat. "The attic, Dad? You've got all those chemicals up there, turpentine varnish solvents. The fumes would destroy the equipment in a week." He clapped a hand on my shoulder, his grip firm, almost possessive. "Besides, you're safe up there. You're doing what you love. We don't need to monitor you when you're painting." I nodded again. I had been nodding a lot lately, but something about his explanation felt wrong. I had been restoring art for 42 years. Helen and I had installed a proper ventilation system when we converted the attic into a studio. It met every safety requirement. There were industrial-grade cameras designed to withstand far harsher conditions than my workspace. I knew that, but I didn't argue. I smiled, returned to my coffee, and let the unease sit quietly in the back of my mind. That same afternoon, I decided to call an old friend, George Mercer, a fellow restorer I had known since the early 80s. We used to meet for coffee once a month and argue about pigment formulas and conservation ethics. I picked up my phone and began dialing. Cameron appeared almost instantly. "Who are you calling, Dad?" "George," I said. "Just checking in." Cameron's smile was quick, but it didn't reach his eyes. "You know George hasn't called in a while, has he?" "Maybe he's busy. Why don't you rest instead?" Before I could respond, he gently but firmly removed the phone from my hand. He set it on the counter, face down. "I'll remind you to call him later," he said. But later never came. 2 days after that, it happened again. This time, it was Ryan. I saw his name illuminate the screen, Ryan Shaw, FBI, and my heart lifted. I hadn't spoken to him in over a week. That was unusual. Ryan called every Sunday without fail. I reached for the phone. Cameron was faster. He picked it up, declined the call, and slipped it into his pocket in one smooth motion. "Dad, you're supposed to be resting," he said lightly. "Ryan's probably just checking in. I'll text him and let him know you're fine." "I want to talk to him," I said. I hated how weak my voice sounded. Cameron's expression softened into something resembling sympathy. "Dad, Ryan's busy. He's out there dealing with criminals and terrorists. The last thing he needs is to worry about you. Let him focus on his job. We've got you covered here." I wanted to snatch the phone back. I wanted to shout that Ryan was my son, that I had every right to speak to him. But the fog pressed down on me again. My thoughts felt heavy, my limbs sluggish. So I sat there, silent, and Cameron walked away with my phone. That night, sleep refused to come. I lay on my back, staring at the ceiling, replaying everything in my mind. The cameras, the intercepted calls, the documents Cameron had been asking me to sign, insurance updates, he said, estate revisions, routine paperwork. But I hadn't read them carefully. I hadn't trusted my mind enough to question them. Now I couldn't remember what I had signed. The next morning I found one of those documents on Cameron's desk. I hadn't gone in there to snoop. I had simply been searching for a pen. The paper lay half covered beneath a folder. I picked it up and adjusted my glasses, squinting at the fine print. My signature sat at the bottom, clear, undeniable. But I didn't recognize the document. It referenced account access, financial authority, power of attorney. My hands began to tremble. I carefully placed the paper back exactly where I had found it and stepped out of the room. My heart was pounding so violently I could feel it in my throat. I didn't fully understand what the document meant, but I knew it wasn't harmless. That evening, Claire brought me my nightly vitamin. She always delivered it herself, never Cameron. She would smile gently, hand me the small white pill along with a glass of water, and wait. She always waited. This time, I decided not to swallow. I placed the pill on my tongue and raised the glass. I let the water wash into my mouth, tilting my head as if to gulp it down. But I kept the pill tucked beneath my tongue. Hidden. Claire watched me closely, her expression calm and patient. "Good," she said softly, brushing a strand of hair from my forehead. "Sleep well, Dad." When she left the room, I sat up slowly. I spat the pill into my palm. It was small, round, chalky white. No imprint, no markings. I held it beneath the lamplight and turned it over between my fingers. And for the first time, I allowed myself to ask the question I had been avoiding. What are they really giving me? The pill dissolved into the water and turned it a cloudy, murky gray. Vitamins don't do that. I stood at the small utility sink in my attic studio, watching the chalky residue swirl in slow circles before settling at the bottom of the glass like ash. My hands were steady, but my heartbeat was not. I reached into the cabinet above the sink and pulled down the old multivitamin bottle Helen and I used to keep beside the coffee maker. There were still a few tablets left inside. For comparison, I filled a second glass with water and dropped one of those in. That tablet fizzed immediately, tiny bubbles rising to the surface. Within moments, it dissolved cleanly, leaving the water almost clear, except for the faint orange tint from its coating. The pill Claire had given me the night before left something else entirely. Gray sludge. It clung to the sides of the glass in streaks heavier than the water itself, like sediment stirred from a riverbed. I poured both glasses down the drain and stood there gripping the edge of the sink. The attic was quiet except for the distant hum of the ventilation system Helen and I had installed years ago. Sunlight filtered through the dormer windows, casting long stripes across half-finished canvases. I thought about the night I had seen Helen standing in the corner of our bedroom, pale, silent, watching me. I had believed I was losing my mind. I had believed grief had finally cracked something inside me beyond repair. But grief does not turn water gray. The pills did. I crossed the studio and pulled my old laptop from beneath a stack of drop cloths. It was slow to boot, older than most of my clients' paintings, but it still worked. I opened a private browser window. My fingers felt clumsy, but I forced them to move. Symptoms of hallucinations, drug-induced confusion, elderly. The results appeared almost instantly. Article after article, clinical descriptions, warning signs, lists of medications known to cause disorientation, memory loss, vivid hallucinations, benzodiazepines, sedative hypnotics, antipsychotics misused, case studies about elder abuse caretakers who administered drugs to control behavior, to fabricate symptoms, to build a paper trail of incompetence. My chest tightened as I read. Confusion, delayed speech, memory gaps, visual hallucinations, paranoia. Every symptom aligned with what I had been experiencing. Every single one. I closed the laptop and sat back in my wooden chair. The studio smelled faintly of linseed oil and old canvas. Around me were paintings, mid-restoration portraits waiting for hands steady enough to mend them. And now, someone my own daughter was trying to erase me. I needed proof, not suspicion, not instinct. Proof. That afternoon, Claire and Cameron announced they were running errands. I heard Cameron's voice drifting in from the driveway. "We'll be back in about an hour, Henry. Don't go anywhere." As though I were a toddler who might wander into traffic. I waited until the car engine faded down Maple Street. Then I moved. Cameron had converted Helen's old sewing room into his home office. The door was usually locked. Today it wasn't. I stepped inside and closed it quietly behind me. The room smelled faintly of cologne and printer ink. Cameron's desk was immaculate, every pen aligned, every folder squared. In the center sat a neat stack labeled in his precise handwriting, insurance, estate, medical. I opened the folder marked medical. On top, lay a glossy brochure, Evergreen Behavioral Center. The cover displayed a serene image of a modern facility nestled among trees. The words beneath it read, "Specialized care for cognitive and behavioral health, private accommodations, 24-hour monitoring, compassionate supervision for those unable to care for themselves." My throat tightened. Beneath the brochure lay a draft intake form. Henry Shaw, age 67. My name was printed at the top. Below it, a checklist. Hallucinations, delusions, paranoia, memory impairment. Several boxes were already checked. In blue ink, Cameron's handwriting. I stared at the page, feeling something cold and sharp settle behind my ribs. This was not precaution. This was preparation. They intended to have me declared incompetent, institutionalized, locked away in a place designed to strip autonomy under the guise of care. Once inside, I would be powerless. In everything I owned, the house Helen and I built a life in the savings from decades of restoration work, the paintings would pass neatly into their control. My hands did not shake this time. I pulled the old studio phone from my pocket and took a photograph of the form. Then I replaced every sheet precisely as I had found it, aligning the edges carefully. Anger has a way of sharpening the mind. By the time I returned to the living room and unfolded the newspaper, my breathing had steadied. The knock at the door startled me. It was softer than Claire's key in the lock, hesitant. I opened it to find Catherine Hayes standing on the porch. She held a ceramic casserole dish wrapped in foil. Catherine had lived 2 houses down for as long as we had. 65, silver hair cut neatly at her chin, sharp eyes that missed little. She and Helen had shared coffee on Tuesdays for years. "Henry," she said gently, "I brought you some casserole." Her gaze lingered on my face. Her expression shifted. "Are you all right?" she asked. I opened my mouth to deliver the usual reassurance. "I'm fine." But something about the way she looked at me stopped the words. Not pity. Assessment. Clinical practiced observation. Catherine stepped inside without waiting to be invited. She set the dish on the hall table and lowered her voice. "I was a nurse for 30 years, she said quietly. "I know what medication side effects look like. You don't look well." My eyes flicked toward the corner of the living room. The camera. Catherine followed my gaze. She saw it instantly. Her mouth tightened. Before I could respond, the front door opened. Claire's voice floated in, bright and rehearsed. "Dad, we're back." She stopped when she saw Catherine. "Mrs.?" Hayes, Claire said, smile snapping into place. "How thoughtful of you to visit. But Dad really needs to rest. Don't you, Dad?" Catherine didn't move. "I was just checking. We have everything under control," Claire interrupted, smoothly stepping between us. "Cameron and I are taking excellent care of him." Catherine held Claire's gaze for a long moment. Then she picked up her empty dish. As she passed me, she leaned in, her voice barely audible. "If you need me," she whispered, "I'm 2 houses down." Then she left. The door clicked shut. Claire turned to me. The softness vanished from her face. "Dad, please don't bother the neighbors with your episodes. People might misunderstand." I nodded. I always seemed to be nodding, but something inside me had shifted. Catherine had noticed. She had seen through the fog, and she had offered help. That night when Claire brought the small white pill to my bedside, I repeated the same performance. Pill on tongue, water raised. Swallow mimed. She waited watching. "Good," she murmured, smoothing my hair. "Sleep well." After she left, I spat the pill into my hand. I lay back against the pillow and stared at the ceiling, and I thought about Ryan. 6 months earlier at Thanksgiving, he had pulled me aside in the kitchen. While Claire and Cameron were in the dining room, he pressed something small into my palm. "It's a backup phone, Dad," he had said quietly. "Prepaid, no contract, no tracking. Keep it charged and hidden somewhere safe, just in case." I had laughed at the time. "You watch too many crime shows," I'd told him, but I kept it, tucked inside an old paint supply box in the attic, forgotten, until now. I needed help, I needed evidence, and I needed to move carefully, because if they realized I was no longer swallowing their pills, the net around me would tighten, and next time, it might not leave room to breathe. The alarm clock beside my bed read 12:13 a.m. when the backup phone began to vibrate. The sound was faint, almost apologetic, but in the stillness of the house, it felt like a detonation. I jerked upright, my heart hammering so violently, I was certain it would echo down the hallway. For one disoriented second, I thought a camera had activated outside my door, that Cameron was standing there listening. The vibration came again. Not a camera, the phone. I swung my legs over the side of the bed and crossed the room without turning on a light. The oak wardrobe loomed against the far wall, its shadow stretching long and distorted across the floor. I reached to the top shelf, fingers brushing dust and cardboard, until they found the paint supply box Ryan had helped me pack the previous Thanksgiving. I lowered it, carefully kneeling on the rug. Inside, beneath unused brushes and hardened tubes of pigment wrapped in a rag stained with ultramarine and ochre, lay the phone. Its screen glowed softly in the darkness. Ryan Shaw. I answered on the second ring, pressing it to my ear. "Ryan," I whispered. "Dad?" His voice was low and urgent, clipped in the way it became when he was deep inside a case. "Listen carefully. You're in danger." My throat tightened instantly. "Ryan, something's wrong. They've been giving me pills. I've been seeing things, hallucinations. I know he cut in voice hardening. I've been investigating Cameron for 3 months. He's not who he says he is." The room seemed to tilt. "What are you talking about?" "He's a career con artist," Ryan said. "Professional. His real name is Kevin Drake. Or, at least that was the last one he was arrested under. Before that, he went by Marcus Sullivan. 3 prior arrests. Every case involved elderly victims with significant assets. He marries into families, isolates the target, manufactures a medical narrative, and drains them. I sat down heavily on the edge of the bed, gripping the phone until my knuckles hurt. Cameron isn't even his real name. No. Ryan exhaled sharply. Anne Claire? I don't know yet. I don't know if she's fully involved or if he's manipulated her. But something is accelerating. Soon. "There's a facility," I whispered. "Evergreen Behavioral Center." I found an intake form. My name was already printed on it. Hallucinations checked. Ryan swore under his breath. "That's the move," he said. "They get you committed, declared incompetent. Once you're legally deemed unfit, they take control of everything: assets, property, medical authority. And once you're inside a place like that, extracting you becomes almost impossible. Why haven't you arrested him?" Silence stretched between us. "Conflict of interest," Ryan said finally. "You're my father. I can't be agent of record. If I push him properly, the defense tears it apart and he walks." I handed everything to Agent Sarah Mitchell. She's building it clean, but she needs time. 2 weeks minimum for probable cause and a warrant. 2 weeks. The word felt enormous. Dad, Ryan continued, his tone sharpening into command. "I need you to follow instructions precisely. Is there any part of the house without cameras?" "The attic," I said immediately. "My studio. He claimed fumes would damage electronics." "Good. That's your safe zone. Stay there as much as you can without raising suspicion. Observe. Document. If you can record anything, do it, but do not let them know you're aware." He paused. "And Dad, whatever happens, do not let them take you to Evergreen. Once you're inside, I can't reach you. Do you understand? I understand. I need you steady for 2 weeks. Can you do that?" I thought of the pill dissolving into gray sludge, of the checklist with my name on it, of Helen's jewelry in the safe. "Yes," I said. "I can. I have to go," Ryan said quickly. "Keep that phone hidden and charged. I'll contact you when I can." A brief pause. "And Dad?" "Yes. I'm going to fix this. I promise." The line went dead. I sat there in the dark, the phone warm in my palm like a small living thing. Then I stood. I moved through the house without turning on lights, checking each door and window. I switched off the porch lamp Helen used to leave glowing through the night. If anyone was watching, I wanted the picture of an old man settling in for sleep. Then I climbed the narrow staircase to the attic. The steps creaked softly under my weight. The studio greeted me with the familiar scent of turpentine and linseed oil. I pulled a chair to the dormer window overlooking the driveway and sat. For a moment I wondered if Ryan was overreacting. Then I reminded myself Cameron believed I was medicated, disoriented, halfway to institutionalization. He did not know I had stopped swallowing the pills. At 1:30 a.m., headlights flickered at the far end of Maple Street. They moved slowly, deliberately. 2 vehicles approached without headlights, a black SUV and a gray sedan. They rolled into my driveway and idled in darkness. 3 men stepped out, tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in dark clothing that swallowed the night. Their movements were efficient, economical. The front door opened from inside. Cameron stepped out, scanning the street once before gesturing them in. No conversation, just a nod. They disappeared into my home. I pressed closer to the window frame, barely breathing. From my angle, I could see a sliver of the first-floor study through a narrow gap in the curtains. Flashlight beams sliced across the room. They moved directly to the filing cabinet. One of the men knelt and pulled out the small safe bolted to the lower shelf, the one that held Helen's jewelry property deed's original wills. He worked quickly. Within seconds, the safe was open. Documents were removed, thick envelopes, stacks of paper. I could not see specifics, but I knew exactly what they were. Deeds, bank statements, insurance policies, everything necessary to control a life on paper. 30 minutes later, the men emerged. They left as silently as they had arrived. The vehicles rolled away, headlights still off. I counted slowly to 600 before moving. When I descended to the study, the safe door hung open. Papers were scattered. The large manila envelope and half its contents were gone. The front door was locked again. Cameron had returned upstairs as if nothing at all had happened. I stood in the doorway of the study and looked at the open safe. They had not come for jewelry. They had come for leverage, for documentation, for the infrastructure required to erase a man legally. I closed the safe carefully, though there was little left worth securing. Then I returned to the attic and resumed my seat by the window. My hands trembled, not with fear, with rage, cold, focused, precise. The sky slowly shifted from black to charcoal gray. Birds began tentative calls from the oak trees lining the yard. Pale blue light crept across rooftops. I had spent decades restoring damaged art, learning to see fractures invisible to others, to identify where stress lines ran beneath varnish and pigment. Now I understood the fracture in my own house, and it was deeper than I had imagined. By the time dawn broke fully over Maple Street, I was no longer reacting. I was calculating. 2 weeks? I would not survive them by accident. For the first time since Helen's funeral, my mind felt sharp, clear, alive. They thought I was dissolving, but I was hardening. I almost leapt out of my skin when Claire's voice drifted from the bedroom doorway. "Dad, I thought I heard you talking." My hand shot instinctively beneath the pillow, pressing down on Ryan's backup phone. It was still warm from the call. For a split second, panic threatened to overtake me. If she had heard even a whisper, I forced myself to go still. The room was dark, the faintest gray of early dawn, barely tracing the edges of the curtains. Claire stood in the doorway, framed by the hallway light, her silhouette sharp against the dimness. I blinked slowly, deliberately, letting my head roll to one side, as if dragged by sleep. "Helen," I murmured, slurring the word. "Where did you put the brushes?" Claire stepped fully into the room. I could feel her eyes on me, assessing. "Dad," she said carefully. "Were you on the phone?" I blinked again, letting confusion soften my face. "Phone." My voice cracked thick with feigned drowsiness. "No, I was dreaming about your mother." She didn't respond immediately. Instead, she stood there scanning the room. Her gaze moved to the nightstand where my regular phone rested exactly where it should, then to the wardrobe, to the rumpled blankets, back to my face. I kept my breathing slow and even my features slack. After a long moment, she exhaled. "Okay, Dad, go back to sleep." But her tone was tight, suspicious. She pulled the door closed behind her. I listened carefully to her footsteps retreat down the hallway. I counted to 60. Then I slid the backup phone from beneath the pillow. I wrapped it in an old shirt and crossed the room, moving quietly. I buried it at the bottom of the wardrobe under a stack of sweaters, pressing the clothing down firmly. My hands were trembling. That had been too close. Breakfast was tense. I swallowed my coffee in silence while Claire placed the small white pill in front of me. Cameron leaned casually against the counter, watching without appearing to watch. I palmed the pill and slipped it beneath my tongue. In the bathroom a few minutes later, I spat it into a wad of toilet paper and flushed. When I returned to the kitchen, I forced a faint smile. "I think I'll spend the day in the attic," I said casually. "Need to sort through some old paintings." Claire looked up from her mug. Her smile was quick, overly bright. "That's nice, Dad. Just don't overdo it." Cameron's voice floated in from the sink. "Yeah, Dad. Take it easy up there." I nodded and climbed the narrow staircase. The attic studio greeted me with familiar scents: linseed oil, turpentine, old wood warmed by sunlight. Light streamed through the dormer window in pale beams that illuminated dust motes drifting lazily in the air. This room was mine. Helen and I had transformed it together 30 years ago, sanding floorboards side by side, installing ventilation, arguing gently about where the easel should stand. 17 paintings leaned against the walls, a Hudson River school landscape from the 1870s, a Victorian portrait of a young woman in lace, a Baroque still life awaiting final varnish. And then Helen. Her portrait stood near the far wall, life-sized and luminous. I had painted it the year we married. She wore a navy dress, her hands folded neatly in her lap, around a single white rose. There was a trace of amusement in her eyes, as though she knew something the rest of us did not. For 15 years, it had hung above the living room fireplace facing the sofa. 3 weeks ago, I had told Claire I wanted to bring it up for cleaning. She had helped me carry it. I hadn't returned it to its place, and now I was grateful. I spent the next hour shifting canvases, pretending to organize. All the while, Ryan's instructions echoed in my mind. Watch them, listen, record anything you can. At one point, while kneeling to reposition a frame, I noticed something I had never paid attention to before a narrow gap between two floorboards. It wasn't large, perhaps half an inch wide, just enough where the wood had shrunk with age. Curiosity tugged at me. I lay flat and pressed my eye to the opening. Below, the living room came into view. The angle was perfect. I could see the sofa, the coffee table, even part of the front entryway. Claire sat on the couch, her phone in hand. A moment later, Cameron entered the frame. He carried a thick stack of cash bound with rubber bands. He dropped onto the sofa and began counting. The bills were unmistakably hundreds. Claire said something I couldn't hear the words, but her posture was rigid. She leaned forward, tense. Cameron laughed. The sound carried faintly upward, sharp and dismissive. He gestured with the money. Claire glanced toward the staircase. She bit her lower lip, nervous, afraid, or guilty. I watched, carefully studying their movements the way I would study cracks in an aging canvas. But I couldn't hear them. The floorboards muted everything. I could see but not listen. And without sound, all I had were assumptions. I sat back on my heels, frustration tightening my chest. I need audio. I need proof. Real proof. I rose and scanned the workbench. Tools lay scattered, palette knives, clamps, jars of solvent. My gaze settled on something near the edge. The small digital camera I used to document restoration projects. It was old but reliable. It had a decent video mode and a built-in microphone. The memory card could hold hours of footage. I picked it up, weighing it in my palm. Compact, unobtrusive. If placed correctly, it could record everything. The question was where. Somewhere visible but invisible. Somewhere they looked at daily, but never truly saw. My eyes drifted to Helen's portrait. For 15 years it had hung in the living room above the fireplace, directly facing the sofa. The frame was thick oak, 4 inches wide, with a hollow space behind the canvas where the backing board rested. There was room there, enough to tuck the camera inside the corner of the frame, angled carefully through a small gap. It would have a clear view of the couch, of Cameron's desk nearby, of every conversation held in that room, and no one would suspect. Why would they? It was just a painting, a portrait of a deceased wife, a fixture of the house, something seen so often it had become invisible. The plan began forming with surprising clarity. I would reinstall the portrait in its original place. They would see it as sentimentality, grief, routine, and behind Helen's calm, painted gaze, the camera would watch. I moved closer to the portrait and ran my fingers along the back edge of the frame. The backing board was secured with small nails, easy enough to remove and reattach. There was space between canvas and frame, enough to conceal the device. I imagined positioning it carefully in the upper corner, drilling a pin-sized opening through the backing board to allow the lens a clean line of sight. I would test the angle from the attic before rehanging it. I would have to work quickly, quietly, and without raising suspicion. Cameron believed I was foggy, compliant, one step from institutionalization. He did not expect planning, he did not expect clarity, and he certainly did not expect resistance. I set the camera on the workbench and looked again at Helen's painted face. Her expression seemed unchanged, serene, patient, as though she were waiting. "All right," I whispered. The plan was simple. I had the camera. I had the location. Now I just needed to hide it in plain sight without them ever realizing I had moved the pieces on the board. And once it was in place, they would no longer be the only ones watching. Installing a camera inside my wife's portrait felt at first like sacrilege. Helen had always believed our home was a sanctuary. No hidden things, no secrets tucked behind walls. The idea of turning her likeness into surveillance equipment carried a quiet shame. But as I sat alone in the attic studio, the tiny device resting on my workbench beneath the glow of a desk lamp, I knew something with absolute clarity Helen would have understood. She always had. The camera was no larger than a coin, matte black casing, a pinhole lens barely visible unless you searched for it, built-in Wi-Fi, motion activation, 1080p resolution, night vision, rechargeable battery rated for a week or more, small enough to vanish into plain sight. I had ordered it 2 days earlier through a prepaid online account. The package had been shipped to Catherine Hayes' address to avoid appearing in our mailbox. That afternoon, while Claire and Cameron were out, Catherine had slipped quietly through the back gate, knocked once on the kitchen door, and handed me the plain brown box without ceremony. No questions, no commentary, just steady eyes and trust. Now the device gleamed faintly under the lamp waiting. I turned it over in my fingers and thought about Helen's final days. 8 months ago, in the soft dimness of her hospice room, her hand had rested in mine, light as parchment, fragile but unwavering. "Take care of yourself, Henry," she had whispered. "Don't let anyone take advantage of your kindness. You're too good, too trusting." I had smiled at her, brushing it aside. Who would take advantage of me? "Helen, I'll be fine." She had looked at me then, not with fear but with knowing. "Promise me," she said. "I promise." I hadn't understood the weight of that promise. I understood now. Helen had sensed something. Perhaps not the full architecture of Cameron's manipulation. Perhaps not the scale of what was unfolding. But she had felt the shift, the imbalance, the fracture, and I had been too consumed by grief to recognize it. Across the studio, her portrait leaned against the wall. I had painted it 30 years ago. We had been newly married then, the world still expansive and bright. Her hair had been dark, her eyes clear and warm. She wore a navy dress, hands folded gently in her lap, around a single white rose. Her expression had always struck people as serene. To me, it was resolute. "Forgive me, sweetheart," I murmured. "I'm about to use your beautiful face to expose something ugly. But you'd want me safe." The decision settled, I began. The first step was simple: bring the portrait back downstairs. I found Claire in the kitchen that afternoon, leaning against the counter, scrolling through her phone. "Claire," I said evenly, "I'm bringing your mother's portrait down. I've repaired the frame." She looked up surprised. "Oh, Dad, you don't have to go through all that trouble." There was a softness in her voice, but it didn't reach her eyes. "This is your mother," I said, firmer than I had been in weeks. "I painted it. I'm not leaving it tucked away." For a brief moment, uncertainty flickered across her face. Resistance unsettled her. "Okay," she said slowly. "Whatever you want." From the sink, Cameron glanced over his shoulder. "Need help carrying it down, Dad?" "No," I replied calmly. "I've got it." I climbed the stairs back to the attic, my pulse quickening not from exertion, but from what I was about to do. The installation required patience. I laid the portrait face down on the padded workbench. The oak frame was solid, well-crafted decades earlier. I removed the small tacks securing the backing board and lifted it carefully, revealing the hollow cavity behind the stretched canvas. The stretcher bars created nearly 2 inches of space enough. I traced the faint outline of Helen's face through the canvas weave. Her eyes. That was where the lens needed to live. Using a precision drill bit barely 2 millimeters wide, I worked from the back, aligning carefully with the center of her left pupil. The bit slipped through with minimal resistance. When I lifted the painting toward the window, a pinpoint of brightness shimmered through the dark iris. Her gaze had always seemed to follow visitors around the room. Now it truly would. I affixed the camera behind the canvas using industrial double-sided tape, adjusting its angle millimeter by millimeter. I powered it on and retrieved my tablet, kept entirely separate from the house network. The camera emitted its own discrete Wi-Fi signal. It would not appear on Cameron's router logs. It existed independently, like a quiet frequency between walls. The app loaded. The screen flickered. Then suddenly, I was looking at my own workbench from inside the painting. The image was dimmer than a traditional camera feed. The aperture was microscopic, but it was clear enough. I spoke aloud. "Testing." Seconds later, I replayed the recording. My voice carried through clean and sharp, better than I had dared to hope. I powered the device down, replaced the backing board, and secured it with the original tacks. From the front, nothing had changed. No distortion, no visible puncture, just Helen, calm, watchful, knowing. I sat back in the studio chair and studied her face. "I'm done being blind," I whispered. For a fleeting instant, I felt her presence, not imagined, not hallucinatory, but remembered. A steadiness behind me, a hand on my shoulder. Carrying the portrait downstairs tested my strength. The oak frame was heavy and awkward. I descended slowly, careful with each step. In the living room, I rehung it above the fireplace, the same hooks it had occupied for 15 years. The angle was ideal. Helen's painted gaze and the hidden lens within it faced directly toward the sofa and coffee table. Anyone seated there would fall perfectly within frame. Claire appeared in the doorway, arms folded loosely. "It looks good," she said softly. "Mom looks beautiful." "She always was," I replied. She stood there longer than necessary, studying the portrait. Then she turned and walked away. She had no idea. Helen was watching now. That evening I retreated to the attic studio, with the tablet balanced on my knees. 9:47 p.m. The motion sensor triggered. The screen flickered to life. Claire and Cameron entered the living room and settled onto the sofa, directly beneath the portrait, directly beneath Helen's gaze. They began speaking. I leaned forward, breath shallow. Their voices flowed clearly through the speaker. No more half-heard laughter through floorboards. No more guessing at tone or expression. I could see them. I could hear them. And they believed themselves alone. Cameron leaned back, draping an arm along the sofa's edge. Claire tucked her legs beneath her. They talked casually at first, mundane details. Logistics, errands. Then their tone shifted. I watched as Cameron gestured toward the hallway. "It won't take much longer," he said, voice low but audible. "He's deteriorating faster than I expected." Claire nodded slowly. "Good," she murmured. The word landed heavier than anything else. "Good." I felt my jaw tighten, but I did not move. They discussed timelines, appointments, paperwork, names I recognized from the intake form. Every word was captured, every inflection preserved. Helen's painted eyes remained serene. Behind that calm truth accumulated. I sat in the dim attic, the faint blue glow of the tablet illuminating my hands. For the first time since Helen's death, I did not feel confused. I did not feel disoriented. I felt precise, focused. They believed I was unraveling. Instead, I was documenting. And for the first time in weeks, I understood something essential. I was no longer reacting to their plan. I was building my own. I will never forget the first sentence that came through that camera. "How much longer until we can move the old man to Evergreen?" The words didn't just reach my ears. They cut through them clean and deliberate, like a blade sliding between ribs. I sat in the dark attic studio, earbuds pressed tight, the tablet's pale glow washing over my trembling hands. On the screen below, Claire and Cameron lounged on the sofa beneath Helen's portrait. They looked relaxed, casual, drinks in hand, bodies angled toward one another in quiet conspiracy. They believed they were alone. They believed they were safe. They had no idea Helen was watching. My hands shook so violently I nearly dropped the tablet. I forced myself to steady it against my knees and tapped the manual record button, even though the motion sensor had already activated. I wasn't risking a glitch, not tonight. Then I turned up the volume. Cameron stretched his arm across the back of the sofa, voice smooth and assured the way it always sounded when he was closing a deal. "The appointment with Russo is next Thursday. He'll declare your dad incompetent. Your dad, not Henry. A clinical detachment wrapped in false intimacy." Claire lifted her wine glass, studying the surface of the liquid as if she were contemplating something mundane. "Are you sure he'll sign off on it?" Cameron chuckled, a low, easy sound that made my stomach twist. "Babe, I paid him $50,000. By Friday, we'll have the commitment papers. $50,000 for a licensed physician to falsify a diagnosis, for a signature that would erase my autonomy, for ink on paper that would bury me alive in a psychiatric facility." A cold pressure built in my chest, spreading outward like frost beneath skin. But I forced myself not to move, not to react, not to miss a single word. Claire set her glass down and leaned back, exhaling as if she'd just completed a tedious task. "God, I can't wait to get out of this house," she said. "I'm exhausted from pretending to care. Pretending." That word struck harder than the rest. Every gentle smile, every "Are you okay, Dad?" Every soft hand resting on my shoulder. A performance. Cameron grinned, teeth flashing faintly in the lamplight. Just think about it. 3.2 million liquid, plus the art. Ashford says the collection's worth at least 1.2 on the black market. Ashford. I etched the name into memory. An art dealer. A fence. Another link in the chain. Claire laughed. It was the same bright, lilting laugh she'd had as a child, when I used to swing her in circles across this very living room. But now, it sounded different, hollow metallic, stripped of innocence. 4.5 million, she murmured, swirling her wine. Not bad for 6 months of playing the devoted daughter. Tears blurred my vision. That was my daughter, the girl who once sat in my studio, asking why broken things deserve second chances. The young woman who clung to my arm at Helen's funeral, sobbing into my jacket. Where had she gone? Or had I only ever seen what I wanted to see? Cameron leaned forward, elbows on his knees, voice lowering. The drugs are working. The isolation's working. Everyone in town thinks Henry's slipping. Henry. Not Dad. Henry. Mrs. Hayes almost screwed it up, Claire muttered. Cameron waved dismissively. No one listens to nosy old women. A nosy old women? I thought of Catherine, her steady nurse's eyes, her quiet courage walking into my home when something felt off. He reduced her to a caricature. Anger flared hot and clean in my chest, slicing through grief. Claire glanced toward the staircase. Do you think Ryan suspects anything? Cameron shrugged, utterly relaxed. He's tied up with the FBI. Conflict of interest. Even if he smells something, he can't touch us. He knew. He understood the legal boundaries restraining my son. This wasn't improvisation. It was structured, strategic. Ryan had been right. Cameron wasn't reckless. He was professional and ruthless. Tears slid silently down my face. I wiped them away with the heel of my hand, but more followed. Grief layered atop betrayal until I felt hollowed out. Then Claire's phone buzzed. She glanced at the screen. Something shifted in her expression, subtle but unmistakable. A softness, a warmth I hadn't seen directed at me in months. I need to take this, she said, rising quickly. Cameron barely looked up. Sure. She stepped out of frame, but the microphone caught her voice faintly from the hallway. Hey, yeah, everything's on schedule. Next week, I know. I love you too. I froze. I love you too. Her tone was entirely different. Not calculating, not rehearsed. Tender, intimate. She returned moments later, slipping her phone into her pocket. Cameron glanced up. Your mom? Without hesitation, Claire replied, Yeah, just checking in. He nodded unconcerned and took another sip, but I sat in the attic heart, pounding painfully against my ribs. Claire's mother, my wife, Helen had been dead for 8 months. So, who had Claire just told she loved? The question echoed through my mind like a stone dropped into a well. I continued watching. They discussed logistics, travel timelines, transferring accounts, a rental property in Florida. Cameron mentioned a storage unit. Claire asked about discreetly liquidating certain paintings. They spoke of my life as inventory, assets, lines on a spreadsheet. When they finally stood and switched off the lights, the room dimmed, but the feed continued. I remained seated long after they left, staring at the frozen image of Claire mid-laugh. I saved the recording. Every word, every laugh, every plan. The file uploaded automatically to a secure cloud account I had created under a false name, another precaution Ryan had once insisted on when I dismissed his concerns as excessive. Now I silently thanked him, but my thoughts circled back again and again to that phone call. I love you too. It wasn't Cameron. He had been sitting inches away. So, who an accomplice? Another lover. A financier. Someone orchestrating from a higher level? The possibility expanded the conspiracy beyond just the two of them. I removed the earbuds and let the attic fall silent. Outside, wind brushed lightly against the dormer window. The house creaked faintly as it settled. Below me, the people I had trusted most slept peacefully. Something inside me shifted. For months, grief had dominated me. Confusion had weakened me. Betrayal had shattered me. But now something else began to grow. Clarity. They believed I was fogged and compliant. They believed I was halfway to Evergreen already. They believed they had 2 weeks to complete their plan. They were wrong. I replayed the segment about Russo. $50,000, Thursday. Commitment papers by Friday. It wasn't just conversation. It was a timeline. Timelines can be disrupted. My breathing steadied. My hands stopped shaking. The pain remained, but beneath it something sharper formed. Resolve. I leaned back against the attic wall and closed my eyes briefly. Helen's portrait downstairs held more than paint now. It held evidence. And tonight had proven something undeniable. They were not improvising. They were executing, which meant they had patterns. And patterns meant vulnerabilities. Whoever Claire had whispered, "I love you" to that person was a loose thread. Loose threads, when pulled carefully, unravel entire tapestries. I opened my eyes and looked at the tablet once more. They believed they were orchestrating my disappearance. They believed I was alone. They had forgotten one critical detail. I spent 42 years restoring damaged art. I know how to study fractures. And I had just found the first crack in theirs. The next morning, Catherine Hayes stood on my doorstep, and she did not look like a woman who intended to leave without answers. I saw her before she knocked. Through the thin lace curtain of the front window, I caught sight of her silver hair pulled into its usual neat bun, her posture straight as a fence post, shoulders squared with purpose. Claire and Cameron had left half an hour earlier, Aaron's appointments whispered plans, and I had been alone in the house replaying the previous night's recording for the third time. When the knock came firm and deliberate, I hesitated only a second. Then I remembered the way she had met Cameron's gaze without flinching. The way she had said the words elder abuse as if they were facts, not accusations. I opened the door. "Henry," she said, stepping closer without waiting for an invitation. Her voice was low urgent. "We need to talk. My sister died in a place like Evergreen." I recognized the pattern. I stepped aside and let her in. We did not remain in the living room. Instinct guided me toward the attic, the one place Cameron believed unmonitored. Catherine followed without question, her eyes scanning the staircase, the walls, the corners where cameras watched. When we reached the studio, I closed the door behind us. "Your sister?" I asked quietly. Catherine sat down on the old wooden chair near my workbench. She folded her hands tightly in her lap, knuckles pale. "Sarah," she said, "my younger sister. 10 years ago, her daughter-in-law had her committed to a facility just like Evergreen. Claimed Sarah was delusional, dangerous to herself. Within 6 months, she was dead." Her voice cracked on the last word. "They said it was natural causes," Catherine continued. "But I saw the medication charts. I saw how isolated she was, sedated, controlled. By the time I understood what was happening, it was too late. A decade of regret hung in the air between us. I didn't fight hard enough," she said. "I let them convince me she was sick, that the family knew best. I won't make that mistake again." I looked at her for a long moment. This woman owed me nothing, yet she stood here risking confrontation with Cameron because she had learned the cost of silence. "I know," I said quietly. "I know what they're planning." I picked up the tablet and turned the screen toward her. I did not play everything, only enough. Cameron's smooth voice, 3.2 million in the bank. Claire's laugh, not bad for 6 months of playing the devoted daughter. Catherine's face drained of color, then it flushed deep red. "I called your son," she said, her voice trembling, not with fear, but anger. "I found Ryan's number through the FBI directory and called him 2 days ago. I told him what I've seen, the pills, the cameras, the way you've looked since they moved in." She drew in a breath. "He said he's working on it, but he needs time. He said my testimony matters because I'm independent, not family, thank you," I whispered. Catherine reached into her purse and pulled out a small spiral notebook. "I've been documenting everything she said. Dates, times, what I've observed, Claire intercepting your mail, Cameron blocking visitors, the decline in your speech, the tremors." She placed the notebook on my workbench. "It's yours." Then she pressed something small into my palm, a brass key. "My house," she said. 2 doors down. If you need to leave in a hurry, you come to me. No questions asked." Emotion tightened my throat. "Catherine." "Don't thank me," she said sharply. "Just promise you won't let them bury you quietly. I promise." We descended the attic stairs together. Halfway down, the front door opened. Cameron, Catherine, and I froze. For a fraction of a second, alarm flashed across her face. Then she straightened her shoulders and continued walking. Cameron stood in the hallway, expression neutral, too neutral. "Mrs. Hayes," he said evenly. "I didn't realize we were expecting company." "I brought Henry a casserole," Catherine replied smoothly. "Just checking in." His smile was polite but brittle. "That's thoughtful. But Henry's family is handling his care. He doesn't need outside interference." "I'm not interfering," Catherine said. "I'm concerned." "Your concern is noted," Cameron replied, stepping closer. "But Henry's situation is a private family matter." "Elder abuse is not a private family matter," Catherine said firmly. "It's a crime." The air in the hallway seemed to drop 10 degrees. Cameron's smile disappeared. "Be careful with accusations," he said softly. "Slander is also a crime." Catherine did not blink. So is poisoning someone without consent. He went very still. I could almost see the gears turning behind his eyes, calculating, assessing risk. Finally, the thin smile returned. "I think it's time you left," he said. Catherine turned to me, her expression softening. "You have my number," she said. "Call any time." Then she walked past him and out the door, head high. Cameron closed it slowly. He turned toward me. "Henry," he said, voice low, "I don't want that woman in this house again. She's filling your head with paranoid nonsense." I blinked, letting confusion cloud my features. "Catherine," I murmured. "She was just being kind." Cameron exhaled through his nose, visibly steadying himself. "Dad, I know you're confused. Mrs. Hayes doesn't understand your condition. She's making things worse. Just stay away from her, okay?" I nodded weakly. "Okay. Okay." He studied me, searching for cracks. He found none. He walked away. He still thinks I'm drugged, I thought. Still compliant. He has no idea I'm recording everything. That night, I returned to the attic with the tablet. At 9:30 p.m., the camera activated. Claire and Cameron settled onto the sofa beneath Helen's portrait. Claire did not waste time. "Catherine Hayes is a problem," she said flatly. Cameron rubbed his temples. "I handled it. That's not enough," Claire snapped. She called Ryan. Cameron's head lifted. What she called him. "We need to move faster." How much faster? Claire was silent for a moment, thinking. Then her expression hardened. "Russo's evaluation is Thursday. But we don't have to wait. We can get Dad to Evergreen Saturday." "Emergency commitment. We say he attacked me." Cameron blinked. "Can we do that? Russo owes us," Claire said coldly. "He'll backdate the paperwork. We stage an incident, I'll have a bruise, maybe a scratch, enough to justify emergency placement. What about Ryan?" "By the time Ryan gets a warrant," she said with icy certainty, "Dad will already be inside Evergreen," declared incompetent. "We'll have power of attorney. Game over." Cameron nodded slowly. "And once he's in there, he won't be getting out," Claire finished. "You know how these facilities work." Cameron leaned back. "Okay, Saturday. I'll support the story. We say he's been paranoid, aggressive. The meds made him unstable. Call Russo in the morning," Claire said. "Tell him we need the paperwork ready by noon." I stopped the recording. My hands shook, not from grief this time, but urgency. Saturday, not next week, not in 8 days, in 48 hours. Ryan had said he needed 2 weeks. They were compressing the timeline. 2 days. 2 days before they fabricated violence and had me locked away. I looked at Helen's portrait on the screen, her painted eyes calm and steady. They believed they were accelerating the trap. They had no idea they had just handed me the final piece of evidence. But 2 days was not much time. I needed Ryan. I needed Agent Mitchell. I needed Catherine. And I needed to act before Saturday noon. 48 hours. That was all I had left. I spent the entire next day researching Evergreen Behavioral Center. What I uncovered turned my fear into something colder, something sharper. I sat cross-legged on the attic floor, my old laptop balanced against a stack of canvases connected to the internet through the mobile hotspot on Ryan's backup phone. I refused to risk the house Wi-Fi. Cameron monitored everything. If I searched Evergreen on our network, he would know. Evergreen's official website looked flawless. Glossy photographs of landscaped courtyards, sunlit therapy rooms, staff members smiling beside elderly residents who appeared peaceful content. There were testimonials from grateful families. An award badge proudly displayed Best Mental Health Facility 2022. It was almost too polished. I clicked through page after page mission statements, compassionate care, philosophies, promises of dignity and safety. Then I began digging beneath the surface. Search Evergreen Behavioral Center complaints. Search Evergreen Behavioral Center lawsuit. The results did not appear immediately. They were buried under layers of curated content and search engine manipulation, but they were there. 3 lawsuits in the past 5 years, all settled out of court, all sealed with non-disclosure agreements. The language was vague wrongful confinement, financial irregularities, disputed guardianship transfers, no details, just legal smoke. Where there is smoke. One small article from a local news site caught my attention. Published 2 years ago. The headline read, "Family Questions, Mental Health Facility After Mother's Passing." The article mentioned a man named Robert Klein, age 58, whose mother Margaret had died after 6 months at Evergreen. The family had raised concerns. A lawsuit had followed. Then settlement, quietly resolved. Reading between the lines, I saw what wasn't written. No accountability, no public reckoning, just silence. I searched for Robert Klein. The trail led me to a Facebook group titled Families Against Elder Abuse. His profile was public. I hesitated only briefly before sending a direct message explaining who I was and why I was reaching out. He replied 30 minutes later with a phone number. My fingers trembled when I dialed. "Hello." His voice sounded guarded, worn thin. "Mr. Klein, my name is Henry Shaw. I believe my family is trying to have me committed to Evergreen. I read about your mother." There was a pause. Then a short, bitter laugh. "Evergreen," he muttered. "God." His voice dropped lower. "Mr. Shaw, whatever you do, do not let them take you there." "I'm trying not to," I said carefully, "but I need to understand what I'm facing." He exhaled slowly. My mother was sharp at 68. Crossword puzzles every morning, balanced her own accounts. Then my sister started saying Mom was declining, said she was confused, a danger to herself. My heart pounded. "They found a doctor?" Robert continued. "Dr. Gerald Russo." I gripped the phone tighter. "Russo," I repeated. "Dr. Gerald Russo." "You know him?" Robert's tone hardened. "He signs off on whoever they want. My mother was committed within days. 2 months at Evergreen, and she actually was confused. They had her drugged so heavily she didn't know my name." He swallowed audibly. "She had $2 million in savings, Mr. Shaw." $2 million. When I finally got access to her financial statements, there was $40,000 left. $40,000? I whispered. Evergreen billed $15,000 a week. Over 6 months, that's $360,000. Where did the rest go? His voice cracked. Wire transfers, consulting fees, legal charges I never approved. By the time I fought through the paperwork, it was too late. I brought her home. 3 months later, she died. Heart failure. But I know what those drugs did to her. "I'm so sorry," I said quietly. "Don't be sorry," he replied, voice steadier now. "Fight. If you can get them into court, I'll testify. I'll say everything." After we hung up, I stared at the wall for a long time. Then I kept digging. Search Evergreen Behavioral Center survivors. I found a blog post from a year ago. The headline read, "Woman Escapes Mental Health Facility Alleges Financial Abuse." The name in the article was Margaret Lawson, 71. Through the blog author, I obtained a contact number. When she answered, her voice was fragile. "Mrs. Lawson, my name is Henry Shaw. I believe my family is trying to send me to Evergreen." There was a long silence, then a trembling breath. "Evergreen," she whispered. "I still wake up from dreams about that place." She told me her story. Her grandson Daniel had petitioned the court claiming she had dementia. Dr. Russo had signed the evaluation. Within weeks she was admitted, sedated, isolated. "They put papers in front of me while I was barely conscious," she said. "I thought I was signing visitor forms. They were deeds, account transfers." "How much?" I asked gently. $1.8 million, she said. "House, savings, investments, all gone." "How did you get out?" "A nurse," she said, Jennifer Wells. She knew something wasn't right. She helped me contact a lawyer. It took 4 months to get an emergency petition approved. Her voice broke. "I live on Social Security now, in a small apartment. Daniel has everything." "If this goes to court," I said quietly, "would you testify?" "Yes," she whispered, "I will." When I ended the call, the attic felt smaller. Robert Klein, Margaret Lawson, nearly $4 million stripped from 2 families. And I had found them in one afternoon. How many others existed in silence? Evergreen was not a facility. It was a machine. A system that required doctors willing to sign lawyers, willing to file families, willing to betray, and administrators willing to look away. Dr. Russo was the gatekeeper. And I was scheduled to become the next transaction. I was closing the laptop when the tablet on my workbench flickered, motion detected. I glanced at the live feed and froze. A man I had never seen before stepped into my living room. He was tall, well over 6 feet, with broad shoulders and short dark hair. His beard was trimmed neatly, his suit black and sharply tailored. No tie, the kind of polish that suggested confidence rather than formality. He carried himself like someone accustomed to control. Claire appeared from the kitchen. The change in her face was immediate. Her expression softened, brightened. She crossed the room in 3 quick strides and wrapped her arms around him. Then she kissed him. Not a polite greeting, not the quick, distant affection she showed Cameron. This was intimate, warm, familiar. It lasted long enough that there could be no misunderstanding. When they separated, she smiled at him in a way I had not seen her smile at her husband in months. I leaned closer to the screen. Where was Cameron? He entered moments later from the hallway, and instead of reacting with anger or shock, he nodded at the stranger. Nodded. The stranger extended a hand. Cameron shook it. Calm. Professional. My pulse roared in my ears. This wasn't an affair. This was partnership. Claire stood between them, her hand resting casually on the stranger's arm. 3 of them. The web was larger than I had believed. The stranger spoke, first voice low, but clear through the hidden microphone. Is everything ready? Cameron answered. Saturday. Claire nodded. All paperwork will be clean, she said. Russo confirmed. The stranger smiled faintly. Good. We don't want delays. His tone was controlled, commanding. This was not an impulsive accomplice. This was someone above Cameron in the hierarchy. I felt something shift inside me. Until now, I had believed Cameron was the architect. Now, I wasn't so certain. The stranger stepped closer to the fireplace, closer to Helen's portrait. For a split second, I thought he might notice the lens. He didn't. Instead, he turned slightly toward Claire. You did well, he said softly, and she looked at him the way she used to look at me when I praised her as a child, with approval, with longing. The pieces began aligning in my mind. The late-night phone call. I love you too. It hadn't been Cameron. It had been him. The stranger. The real connection. The real axis around which this plan revolved. My breath came shallow. If Cameron was the operative, this man was the strategist, the mastermind, and I was no longer facing just a son-in-law con artist. I was facing an organization. Below me, the 3 of them sat on my sofa, discussing timelines, contingencies, contingency lawyers. I pressed record again, ensuring every second was captured. Saturday. 2 days away. And now I knew something else. Cameron was not the head of this operation. Someone else was pulling the strings. And my daughter. My daughter might not simply be complicit. She might be at the center. I leaned back slowly, earbuds still in place, heart pounding. The truth was bigger than betrayal. It was conspiracy. And I had just seen the face of the man who might be orchestrating it all. The man standing in my living room was tall, immaculately dressed in an expensive charcoal suit, his posture relaxed and assured. His eyes were cold, assessing strategic. And my daughter was kissing him, as if Cameron did not exist. I sat motionless in the attic, staring at the glow of the tablet screen, my pulse pounding in my ears. Cameron was gone for the day at work, or wherever he pretended to go. Claire and the stranger had the house to themselves, and they were not wasting the opportunity. They broke apart slowly, lingering just long enough to make the intimacy unmistakable. The man eased onto the sofa and pulled Claire down beside him. She leaned into his shoulder instinctively, her fingers resting lightly on his knee. Her face softened in a way I had not seen directed at Cameron. Not once, not ever. I raised the volume, forcing myself to breathe evenly. So we're still on schedule, the man asked. His voice was calm, smooth, someone accustomed to control. Saturday, Claire nodded without hesitation. Yes. Russo agreed to backdate the evaluation. Saturday morning, we get Dad to Evergreen. My chest tightened. And Cameron, he asked casually. Claire laughed, a clipped, dismissive sound that sent a chill through me. Cameron thinks we're splitting everything after the commitment. He has no idea about the offshore accounts you set up. The man's lips curved into a satisfied smile. $3.5 million, he said, transferred within 48 hours of your father's commitment. By the time Cameron realizes what happened, we'll be in Grand Cayman. Grand Cayman, offshore accounts. They weren't just stealing from me. They were planning to vanish. And Cameron, who I had believed to be the architect of this entire nightmare, didn't even know he was being cut out. Claire hesitated for a moment, chewing lightly on her lower lip. What if he tries to stop us? She asked. The man leaned back, utterly composed. He won't. I've been setting him up for months. Every financial document, every communication with Russo, every transaction. Cameron's name is on everything. My stomach turned. Cameron wasn't the mastermind. He was the fall guy, a patsy carefully positioned to absorb the fallout when the scheme collapsed. Claire leaned forward and kissed the man again, this time briefly but intimately. "You're brilliant, Nathaniel," she murmured. Nathaniel. The name settled heavily in my mind. Nathaniel smiled with the quiet arrogance of someone who believed himself untouchable. "I know," he said. They shifted closer together, discussing logistics with the detached tone of business partners planning a merger. "The paintings alone will bring in at least $1.2 million, Nathaniel continued. Ashford confirmed the valuation. "I'll handle the transaction," Claire nodded. "All 17 pieces. Dad restored most of them himself. No emotion, no hesitation. 17 paintings. My life's work, the culmination of decades spent preserving history, reduced to a figure on a spreadsheet." Nathaniel shrugged lightly. "Sentiment doesn't buy Caribbean property." For a fleeting second, Claire looked uncertain. Sometimes she said quietly, "I wonder if we're pushing this too far." Hope flickered in my chest. Maybe some part of her still felt something. Guilt, doubt, regret. Nathaniel's response extinguished it instantly. "Too far." His tone sharpened. "Claire, 3 years ago, you came to me drowning in debt. Your exact words were, 'My dad is sitting on millions and I can't breathe.' This was your idea. 3 years." The words struck like a physical blow. 3 years ago was 2021, before Helen died, before Cameron entered our lives, before I had any reason to suspect betrayal, which meant Claire had been planning this long before grief clouded my judgment. Cameron was not the architect. He was another instrument, another manipulated asset. Claire had built this plan from the ground up. "I know," she replied quietly. Her voice hardened again. "You're right." I reached for Ryan's backup phone, my hands trembling so violently I nearly dropped it. I captured a still image of Nathaniel's face from the video feed, clear and well lit. Then I clipped 30 seconds of their conversation, ensuring Nathaniel's voice was audible when he said, "Cameron's name is on everything and Grand Cayman." I sent both files to Ryan with a message. "Found this. Claire has a partner. Name is Nathaniel, sending photo." 5 minutes later, Ryan replied, "Digging now." "Stay safe." I forced myself to remain calm. While the live feed continued recording downstairs, I combed through every document I had copied from Cameron's office weeks earlier. Emails, draft contracts, financial correspondence. One email to Victor Ashford caught my attention. 17 pieces. 20th century American art. Owner willing to sell. Documentation will be signed and notarized. Let me know your offer. 17 pieces. My entire collection. They intended to sell everything after my commitment. Once I was declared incompetent, forged signatures would raise no suspicion. Guardianship papers would legitimize every transaction. They would erase me legally before they erased me physically. I searched Victor Ashford, exactly as I suspected. A Manhattan gallery owner with a polished public profile and a whispered reputation in private circles. Investigated in 2019 for trafficking stolen artwork. Case collapsed for lack of evidence. He operated in the shadows between legality and crime. An hour later, Ryan's message appeared. Nathaniel Holloway, investment banker. On FBI watch list. Bigger than we thought. I'm coming tomorrow morning. Do not let them take you. A second notification followed a PDF attachment. I opened it immediately. Nathaniel Holloway, age 39, senior investment banker at Crestview Capital, under federal investigation since 2022 for suspected money laundering and coordinated financial fraud. No charges filed, insufficient evidence. 2 prior relationships with affluent women, both resulting in significant unexplained financial losses. No prosecutions, no convictions. A pattern without proof, until now. My breathing slowed. Nathaniel was not improvising. He was building long-term financial extraction schemes, recruiting insiders when necessary. And Claire was not a victim. She was a collaborator. The more I replayed their conversation in my mind, the clearer it became. 3 years ago, she had approached him. 3 years of planning. 3 years of preparation. Cameron had likely been recruited later useful because he appeared legitimate, respectable, a convenient middleman to sign documents and communicate with Russo. Nathaniel remained in the background, untouched, untarnished, until this moment. Another message from Ryan came through. This is organized financial exploitation. Dad, I need you steady. I'll be there in the morning. Whatever happens tonight, do not confront them. I stared at the tablet, watching Claire and Nathaniel speak in low tones. She leaned into him again, laughing softly. My daughter. The child who once believed broken things could be made beautiful again, now orchestrating destruction with surgical precision. The weight of it nearly crushed me. But beneath the grief, something else hardened. Clarity. This was no longer just about survival. It was about exposure. They believed Saturday was inevitable. They believed I was still sedated, confused, compliant. They had no idea their entire operation was being recorded from within the walls of my own home. No idea that Robert Klein and Margaret Lawson were willing to testify. No idea that Catherine Hayes had kept a detailed log. No idea that Ryan was on his way. I leaned back against the attic wall tablet balanced in my lap, the glow illuminating Helen's portrait hanging downstairs. They thought they were planning an escape. They thought Cameron would take the fall. They thought I would be locked away before anyone could intervene. But they had made one mistake. They underestimated the old man in the attic. And by tomorrow morning, Nathaniel Holloway's carefully constructed empire would begin to crack. Friday morning arrived like a verdict already decided. At 8:17 a.m., Dr. Gerald Russo stepped through my front door, carrying a polished leather briefcase and wearing a smile that never reached his eyes. I had been awake since 4. I sat in the attic studio, with the tablet balanced on my knees, watching the live feed from Helen's portrait. Claire and Cameron had whispered in the living room long after midnight. I hadn't caught every word through the floorboards, but I didn't need to. I understood what today meant. Russo's evaluation was the final signature on my disappearance. Once he signed those papers, they could send me to Evergreen, institutionalized, declared incompetent, erased. The doorbell rang. I heard Claire's voice drift down the hallway, bright and syrupy, polished to perfection. Dr. Russo, thank you so much for coming. I rose slowly from the attic chair and steadied myself before descending the stairs. I had to perform, confused, vulnerable, harmless. If Russo sensed clarity, he might adjust the script, and I needed the script intact. Claire met me at the base of the staircase, her hand curling gently around my elbow. To an outsider, it would have looked tender. Dad, she said softly. Doctor, Russo is here to help you. Just answer honestly, okay? I gave her a faint nod. Okay. We settled in the living room. Russo took the armchair opposite me, placing his briefcase neatly beside his polished shoes. Claire and Cameron hovered just behind him, positioned like concerned relatives in a staged intervention. Above us, Helen's portrait watched. Russo opened his case and removed a clipboard. Mr. Shaw, he began smoothly. How are you feeling today? I'm fine, Doctor. Your daughter mentioned you've been confused lately. Seeing things that aren't there, I don't know what she means. He made a notation without lifting his eyes. The questions followed in sequence mechanical rehearsed. What year is it 2024? Who is the current president Donald Trump? What day of the week is it Friday? Can you count backward from 100 by 7s, 193, 86, 79, 72, 65, 58? I continued steadily without hesitation. Russo's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. He hadn't expected clarity. He flipped to another page. Do you ever feel like people are watching you? He asked, tone subtly shifting. I paused deliberately. Sometimes. Do you hear voices I sometimes hear? My wife, I said evenly. She passed 8 months ago. His pen moved quickly. I saw him underline something. Do you feel safe in your home? I held his gaze. Should I not? For a fraction of a second, suspicion flickered in his eyes. He understood that I was not cognitively impaired. But it didn't matter. He was not there to diagnose. He was there to certify. Cognitive decline can present subtly, he said, voice dipping into patronizing reassurance. Especially at your age. I am not suffering from dementia, I replied calmly. Dad? Claire interjected softly. Please, Dr. Russo is trying to help. I turned my head toward her. There was no warmth in her expression. Only calculation. The evaluation ended in less than 20 minutes. Russo stood, shook my hand with manufactured concern, and followed Claire and Cameron into the kitchen for what he described as a private consultation. I climbed the attic stairs instead, and I listened. The camera inside Helen's portrait captured everything. There are clear signs of paranoid delusions. Russo said, his voice clinical and detached. Possible early-stage dementia. He presents as a danger to himself. Cameron asked, so you'll sign the commitment already completed? Russo opened his briefcase. On the screen, I saw the stack of documents, thick formal, clipped neatly together. Backdated to last week, he continued. He can be admitted immediately. My stomach dropped. The evaluation had been theater. He had filled out the paperwork before he ever arrived. Tomorrow morning, Claire asked. Ambulance at 7 a.m., Russo replied. Transfers are smoother early. Less resistance, patient, not father, not man. Cameron removed an envelope from his jacket and slid it across the counter. Russo accepted it without hesitation. I zoomed the camera feed. Cash, bundled, approximately $50,000. The exchange was crisp in high definition, every second preserved. As soon as Russo left the house, I retrieved the backup phone and sent Ryan a message. They're coming at 7 a.m., tomorrow, by ambulance. 5 minutes later, the response appeared. I'll be there at 6 a.m. Don't let them take you. 6 a.m., 1 hour of margin. If Ryan arrived on time, everything would change. If he didn't, I pushed the thought aside. That evening, Claire stood beneath Helen's portrait again, phone pressed to her ear. It's done, she said, barely containing her excitement. Russo signed everything. Tomorrow morning, Dad goes to Evergreen. Transfers start by noon. Nathaniel's voice crackled faintly through the speaker. Meet me in Grand Cayman next Friday, he said. And don't forget the note for Cameron. Claire laughed softly. He'll never suspect. And if he does, Nathaniel replied coolly, every document points to him. He goes to prison. Her laughter sharp and light and satisfied. Ice settled deep inside my chest. That night, I did not sleep. I reviewed every recording in sequence. Russo's falsified diagnosis. The bribe. The offshore transfer discussion. I copied everything onto 3 USB drives. One returned to the paint supply box in the attic. One into the inner pocket of my jacket. The third I sealed inside an envelope. At 2 a.m, I slipped out the back door and walked quietly to Catherine Hayes' house. She answered in her robe, eyes widening at the sight of me. Henry, keep this, I whispered, pressing the envelope into her hands. If anything happens to me, give it to Ryan. Her fingers tightened around it immediately. I will. I walked back home beneath a sky just beginning to pale. 5 a.m. Ryan would arrive in an hour. The ambulance at 7. I needed to endure 60 minutes. At 5:30 a.m. Headlights flashed across the attic ceiling. I moved to the dormer window. 2 vehicles idled in my driveway. A white van labeled private medical transport, and a black sedan with tinted windows. They were early. An hour and a half early. Ryan was not here. My pulse pounded violently in my ears. Then it happened. A sharp, explosive crack echoed from downstairs. Glass shattering, not a doorbell, not a knock. Glass breaking. They weren't waiting for consent. They weren't following procedure. They were taking me now. The ambulance was scheduled for 7 a.m. At 5:45 a.m., I heard the siren. It wasn't loud, just a short burst as the vehicle turned onto my street, but it was enough to send a cold wave through my chest. They had moved the timeline up. I sat in the attic frozen for a split second, staring at the clock glowing in the corner of my tablet screen. 5:45. Too early. Below me, I heard the front door open. The hinges creaked softly. Footsteps crossed the hardwood floor. Low, urgent voices. Cameron. Let's move fast, he said. Get him before he wakes up. Claire's reply was calm. Too calm. He's upstairs sleeping. We have time. Sleeping. Like I was an object to be transported. The tablet in my lap still showed a paused frame from the night before Claire kissing Nathaniel Holloway in my living room. The image felt like a brand burned into my memory. Then I heard boots on the stairs, heavy, deliberate, coming up for me. Adrenaline flooded my system. I slid the tablet under my arm and stood. My knees protested I was 67, not built for sprinting up and down narrow attic stairs, but fear sharpened everything. I eased the attic door open an inch and looked down the hallway. 2 men in medical uniforms had reached the top of the stairs. One carried a folded stretcher. The other held a clipboard in one hand and a syringe in the other. Behind them stood Cameron, jaw-tight, eyes hard. Claire hovered beside him, her face blank and unreadable. He's in the bedroom, Cameron said. Sedate him and bring him down. We'll handle the paperwork. Claire added, voice clipped and controlled. Make it quick. I don't want the neighbors asking questions. The 2 men nodded and started toward my bedroom. I stepped fully into the hallway. Looking for me? I said. All four of them froze. Cameron's eyes widened. Claire's color drained instantly. The two so-called medics exchanged a glance, hands twitching. Dad, Claire began forcing brightness into her voice. You're awake. We were just... I know exactly what you were doing, I said evenly. I raised the tablet. And I have proof. Cameron recovered first. You're confused, he snapped. That's why we're doing this. You need help. Help. I let out a harsh laugh. You mean Evergreen Behavioral Center. The place where people go in wealthy and come out bankrupt, or worse. Claire's composure cracked. Her eyes narrowed, something sharp and angry surfacing beneath the mask. Dad, you're not well, she said coldly. I tapped the screen. The video filled the hallway. Her voice echoed clearly. How much longer until we can move the old man to Evergreen? Cameron's voice followed. Russo will sign off. I paid him $50,000. Then Claire again. $3.2 million in the bank, plus the paintings. $4.5 total. The words hung in the air like smoke. Cameron went pale. One of the medics shifted backward. Claire stood rigid, jaw clenched so tightly I could see the muscles jump. You drugged me, I said. You isolated me. You bribed a psychiatrist. You forged paperwork. And you plan to steal everything I've built, Cameron lunged. Give me that. I stepped back sharply. Touch this tablet and you'll regret it, I said. There are 3 copies. One with my neighbor, one in a secure cloud account, and one with my son. The word son hit like a detonator. You called Ryan. Claire's voice rose shrill and unsteady. I didn't have to, I replied. He's been investigating you. Cameron turned on her. You said he wouldn't be involved. He wasn't, she shot back, until you pushed the timeline. The medics were edging toward the stairs now. We're not part of this. One muttered. We were just hired by who I demanded. He pointed hesitant. Him. He paid us $5,000 to come early, said it was urgent. Before Cameron could respond, a voice thundered from downstairs. FBI, nobody move. The sound of heavy boots filled the stairwell. Ryan appeared, first badge-raised expression, carved from stone. Behind him came Agent Sarah Mitchell, calm and focused, followed by 2 uniformed officers. Ryan took in the entire scene in one sweeping glance, me standing with the tablet. Claire rigid and furious, Cameron pale, the 2 fake medics with raised hands. Stay exactly where you are, Ryan said. His voice was controlled, but there was steel beneath it. He looked at me. Dad, are you okay? I'm fine, I said. They're not. Ryan turned to Claire. For a flicker of a second, I saw something in his eyes. Hurt, disbelief. Then it was gone. Professional detachment replaced it. Claire Shaw, he said evenly. Cameron Drake. You are under arrest for conspiracy to commit fraud, elder abuse, attempted kidnapping, and financial exploitation. This is insane, Claire screamed. He's delusional. We were helping him. Agent Mitchell stepped forward, cuffs ready. The 2 medics were restrained, first protesting weakly that they didn't know. Cameron made one last desperate attempt. Ryan, listen, your father is sick. We have a doctor's report from Dr. Gerald Russo. Ryan cut in coolly. The psychiatrist you paid $50,000? We arrested him an hour ago. He's cooperating. Silence slammed into the hallway. Claire's face drained completely of color. Cameron sagged as if someone had cut his strings. Ryan stepped closer to me. Dad, we're taking you somewhere safe, he said quietly. You'll give a statement. We'll handle the rest. I nodded. Then I met his gaze again. There's one more, I said. Ryan's eyes sharpened. Nathaniel Holloway. Recognition flickered. You're certain I recorded him, I replied. He's the one orchestrating everything. Offshore accounts, Grand Cayman. Cameron was just another pawn. Ryan's jaw tightened. He's on our watch list, he said. We didn't have enough. You will, I answered. Ryan studied me carefully. How? I allowed myself a thin smile. Nathaniel believes $4.5 million is about to move into offshore accounts. He won't resist overseeing that transfer personally. Ryan understood immediately. You can bait him, he said. Yes. I held up the tablet again. He thinks I'm still going to Evergreen. He thinks Cameron is taking the fall. If he believes the money is about to be released, he'll show up to control it. Ryan nodded once. We'll set up a controlled transfer, he said to Agent Mitchell. Coordinate cybercrime and financial crimes. Mitchell was already on her phone. Claire stared at me, fury blazing through the last of her composure. You're ruining everything, she hissed. I looked at her not as a father, but as a man facing someone he no longer recognized. No, I said quietly. You did that? The officers led Cameron and Claire down the stairs. The house felt suddenly hollow. Ryan remained beside me. You did good, he said softly. I looked toward Helen's portrait hanging at the end of the hallway. She did? I replied. Ryan followed my gaze. Mom would have been proud, maybe. Or maybe she would have simply shaken her head, saddened but unsurprised. Outside, the early morning light had begun to brighten the street. Neighbors' curtains twitched. Patrol cars idled quietly. The ambulance doors remained open, unused. Ryan placed a steady hand on my shoulder. It's not over, he said. I know, I answered. Nathaniel Holloway still believed he was about to collect millions. And men like Nathaniel never resist collecting what they think they've won, which meant he would come. And when he did, he wouldn't be walking into a fortune. He'd be walking into a trap. Nathaniel Holloway had always operated under a single unshakable belief: he was untouchable. That illusion was about to fracture. Claire and Cameron sat side by side on my sofa, wrists cuffed in front of them, the early morning sunlight pouring through the windows and exposing every crack in their composure. The room that had once held birthday parties and holiday dinners now felt like a holding cell. Agent Sarah Mitchell stood near the front door posture, steady, one hand resting lightly near her holster, eyes alert but controlled. Ryan stood in the center of the living room, all focus and contained intensity, the badge at his belt catching the light. Dad, he said quietly, his voice calm but edged with urgency. Who exactly is Nathaniel Holloway? And how do we bring him in? I lifted Claire's phone, the one I had quietly slipped from the hallway table during the chaos upstairs, when the ambulance crew had been turned away and the officers had moved in. The device felt strangely heavy in my hand. Nathaniel Holloway, I said evenly as the architect. Claire has been working with him for 3 years. Cameron was never the mastermind. He was leverage, a tool. Cameron's head snapped up as though I had struck him. What are you talking about? He demanded, confusion and fear colliding across his face. I didn't look at him. My eyes remained on Ryan. Nathaniel has been waiting for confirmation that I was admitted to Evergreen. That text was the trigger. Once he receives it, the funds move offshore. Ryan's expression sharpened instantly, the pieces aligning. Then we give him exactly what he's expecting. Claire's voice cut through the room, sharp and venomous. I won't help you. I turned my gaze to her, holding it steady. You don't have to. I know your passcode. I've watched you enter it dozens of times. The color drained from her face so quickly it was almost painful to watch. Cameron leaned forward, desperation overtaking whatever loyalty he had left. I'll help, he blurted. I swear. Let Nathaniel take the fall. He planned this. Ryan gave him a single measured nod. Where is he? Riverside Hotel. Cameron said immediately. Room 412. He's been there all week. Waiting. Ryan glanced toward Sarah. Notify local. Wait, I said. Both of them turned toward me. We don't go to him. I continued. We let him walk into our house. Ryan studied my face carefully. Explain. I raised the phone slightly. We send the message he's expecting. Tell him I've been admitted to Evergreen. Invite him here to celebrate before Claire leaves for the airport. Sarah's brow furrowed. We have to be precise. No entrapment complications. It's not coercion, I said calmly. He's free to decline. Ryan considered the strategy for only a moment more. Do it. I unlocked the phone, forcing myself to mimic Claire's casual tone, the shorthand she often used in texts. Done. Dad is at Evergreen. Come to the house. We need to celebrate before I leave for the airport. I pressed send. The small whoosh of the outgoing message felt louder than it should have. Claire stared at me, fury burning behind her eyes. You have no idea what you've just done. I met her gaze without flinching. I stopped you. Then we waited. Ryan positioned himself just out of sight in the hallway. Sarah remained near the front entrance. 2 uniformed officers moved quietly to cover the side yard and rear exit. The house felt unnaturally still, like the seconds before a storm breaks. 28 minutes later, tires crunched over gravel. A sleek black sedan rolled into my driveway. Through the front window, I saw him step out. Relaxed, confident, carrying a bottle of champagne. The front door opened before he could knock. Nathaniel Holloway walked in like a man arriving at his own victory party, "Claire," he called out brightly. "We did it." "Where's the old?" He stopped mid-stride. His eyes found me first. Then they shifted to Claire and Cameron, both cuffed and silent on the sofa. His triumphant smile dissolved. Ryan stepped forward from the hallway, badge raised. "Nathaniel Holloway, FBI. You're under arrest." Nathaniel's instinct was immediate. He spun toward the door. Sarah was already there. He darted left. She moved faster. In one fluid motion, she tackled him to the hardwood floor. The champagne bottle flew from his hand, striking the entryway and exploding into shards of glass and foam. The celebratory hiss of carbonation turned into a harsh, sticky spray across the floor. Ryan cuffed him swiftly and hauled him upright. Nathaniel's breathing was ragged now, but defiance flickered behind his eyes. "This is absurd," he snapped. "You don't have anything." "Actually," I said, stepping forward with the tablet in my hands, "we have quite a bit." I pressed play. Claire's voice filled the room. What about Cameron? Nathaniel's response followed, smooth and disturbingly casual. "Cameron's the fall guy. Once the money clears, he's a liability." "What does that mean?" Claire asked. "Accidents happen," Nathaniel replied lightly. "Car trouble, a medical incident. Clean." There was a pause. "You're talking about eliminating him," Claire whispered. "I'm talking about removing loose ends," Nathaniel answered. "Unless you want to spend the rest of your life worrying he'll talk." "No, then trust me." The recording ended. The silence that followed was suffocating. Cameron's face drained of color. He turned slowly toward Claire, disbelief overtaking him. "You were going to let him kill me." Claire's mouth opened, but no defense emerged. Cameron lunged toward her in a burst of rage. Ryan intercepted him instantly, forcing him back down onto the sofa. "Enough." Nathaniel let out a short, ugly laugh. "That recording won't survive court," he sneered. "Illegal surveillance." Ryan met his gaze without blinking. "Conspiracy to commit murder gives us probable cause. That opens doors you don't want opened." Sarah's phone vibrated. She glanced down and then looked up sharply. "Ryan, outstanding warrant, Nevada, 2019, elder financial exploitation." Ryan's expression hardened further. Details, 72-year-old widow. $4 million, committed to a psychiatric facility. She died there. Every set of eyes in the room turned toward Nathaniel. He didn't appear surprised. "Allegations," he said coolly. "Never proven. They will be," Ryan replied. I stepped closer to Nathaniel, studying him without the barrier of a screen between us. "So, this wasn't your first attempt," I said. "You've done this before." He held my gaze with a reptilian calm. "You'd be surprised how easy it is to convince people their loved ones are unstable." My jaw tightened. Behind him, Claire began to cry soft, fractured sobs. "Dad," she whispered. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean for it to go this far." I turned toward her slowly. "You meant every step I said." Her shoulders shook. "I was drowning. Debt. Pressure." "Nathaniel said Nathaniel didn't force you." I interrupted. Her eyes searched mine desperately. "I loved you," I said quietly. "I trusted you. Dad, please." The daughter I raised, I continued, would never have built a plan to erase me. Her composure collapsed entirely. Ryan and Sarah led Nathaniel toward the door. Officers separated Claire and Cameron. 3 patrol cars. 3 separate futures. As Nathaniel was guided outside, he glanced back once, not with fear, but with calculation. Calculation would not save him now. The patrol cars pulled away one by one, red and blue lights reflecting off the windows of the house that had nearly become my prison. Silence returned. Footsteps approached softly from the driveway. "Henry?" Wine turned. Catherine Hayes stood near the mailbox, concern etched across her face. "I saw the police," she said gently. "Are you all right?" I drew in a long, steady breath. "Yes," I said. "I believe I am." She stepped forward and squeezed my hand. "I told you we would fight." And we did. She nodded once and walked back toward her house. I remained in the doorway watching the horizon brighten. For the first time in months, the house felt like mine again. No hidden pills. No staged concern. No whispered plans to erase me. But even as the morning grew warmer, one truth settled firmly in my mind. This was not finished. Dr. Gerald Russo had falsified evaluations for money. Evergreen Behavioral Center had institutionalized exploitation. Nathaniel Holloway had victims beyond me. Justice had begun. But justice is not a single moment. It is a process. And I was no longer the confused old man they believed they could silence. I was a witness, and I intended to make sure no one else ever woke to the sound of sirens at 5:45 in the morning, wondering how their own family had turned their life into a transaction. What they tried to do to me was not merely betrayal, it was a business model, and that business was about to collapse. With Claire Cameron and Nathaniel in federal custody, Ryan shifted his focus to the true engine behind it all, Evergreen Behavioral Center. 3 days after the arrests, just after sunrise, a convoy of black SUVs and unmarked sedans rolled through the iron gates of Evergreen's manicured campus on the edge of town. To the outside world, the place looked serene: white columns, trimmed hedges, a fountain trickling in the courtyard, a brochure's dream. Then the doors burst open. FBI agents in tactical vests moved in with controlled precision. Badges raised, warrants in hand. Administrators were pulled from offices. Computers were seized. Filing cabinets were emptied onto rolling carts. Patients were evaluated by independent medical teams brought in under emergency authority. I wasn't there. Ryan had insisted I stay home. "You've done enough," he'd said. That evening he called. "Dad," he began, and something in his voice made me sit up straighter. "It's worse than we thought." I pressed the phone to my ear. "How bad?" "There are 32 patients currently housed there," he said. 28 show clear signs of severe overmedication. Sedatives, antipsychotics, benzodiazepines administered without proper consent or clinical necessity. I closed my eyes. Financial records show $47 million collected in patient care fees over the last 5 years. 47 million, I whispered. Russo kept meticulous books, Ryan continued. Spreadsheets, percentages, asset valuations. He took 15% of every patient's estate. The rest moved through shell corporations and offshore accounts. I felt the air leave my lungs. "How many victims?" I asked quietly. "At least 50 confirmed so far," Ryan said. "Some died at Evergreen. Others were released after their money ran dry, drug disoriented and broke." His voice hardened. "Dad, your case cracked it open." I stared at the quiet room around me, my house, almost lost. 50 families. "Where's Russo?" I asked. "In custody." "Doctor?" Gerald Russo now sat in an FBI interrogation room, his tailored suit wrinkled confidence replaced by a sheen of sweat across his forehead. Ryan and Agent Sarah Mitchell faced him across a steel table. A thick evidence file lay between them. "I demand my attorney," Russo said stiffly. "You'll have one," Ryan replied calmly. "You'll need one." Russo folded his hands tightly. "I conducted evaluations. My medical judgment is protected." "You signed commitment orders for over 50 wealthy individuals in 5 years, Ryan said. "Every one of them had substantial assets. That's not medicine, that's racketeering." Sarah slid a document across the table. "This is the evaluation you performed on Henry Shaw last Friday. You diagnosed severe paranoid psychosis and auditory hallucinations." Russo said nothing. "Your own notes," Sarah continued state. "He answered every cognitive question correctly. You backdated the paperwork to fabricate a treatment history." Ryan leaned forward. "That's federal fraud." Russo's lawyer arrived shortly after, but by then the paper trail was already overwhelming. The investigation spread quickly. Richard Crane, the attorney who drafted the fraudulent power of attorney documents, was arrested at his downtown firm. He claimed he had simply followed client instructions. The FBI uncovered encrypted emails tying him directly to Russo and Evergreen's financial channels. Victor Ashford, the Manhattan art dealer prepared to liquidate my collection, was detained at his gallery. A search warrant revealed a ledger spanning 2 decades of stolen and fraudulently acquired artwork. The conspiracy was not a side hustle. It was an enterprise. 6 primary defendants, 50 confirmed victims, $47 million siphoned from the elderly and vulnerable. Evergreen Behavioral Center had been a facade polished brochures, concealing a machine designed to strip dignity, autonomy, and wealth. Ryan asked me to provide a full deposition. I spent 2 long days inside a federal building, recounting every detail. The hidden cameras, the pills, the forged documents, the bribe to Russo, the recordings from Helen's portrait. I handed over every file I had preserved in that attic studio. "This is one of the most comprehensive victim testimonies I've ever seen," Ryan told me. "It's going to anchor the prosecution." But I was not alone. Robert Klein drove 3 hours to meet me at a quiet cafe near my house. He was tall, silver-haired, carrying grief like a permanent shadow. "What you did," he said, gripping my hand firmly. "You saved others." "I wish I could have saved your mother," I replied. His eyes filled, but did not spill. "You gave her justice," he said. "That matters." Margaret Lawson also agreed to testify. I met her at a community center where she now lived in a modest apartment. She leaned on a walker, but her eyes were fierce. They took everything she said, but they didn't take my voice. I squeezed her hand. "We'll make sure it's heard." Federal indictments followed swiftly. Dr. Russo, Richard Crane, Victor Ashford. Nathaniel Holloway's outstanding Nevada warrant was elevated into federal charges, including conspiracy and financial exploitation. Cameron and Claire faced counts of conspiracy fraud, elder abuse, and attempted kidnapping. The U.S. Attorney's Office pursued maximum sentencing. "They want precedent," Ryan told me. A clear message. Evergreen was shut down permanently. Federal authorities seized the property. Remaining patients were transferred to legitimate facilities under court supervision. A restitution fund was established, though much of the stolen money had vanished into offshore networks. Still, the machine had been dismantled. 3 months later, autumn settled over the city in crisp gold light. Ryan and I stood outside the federal courthouse. "You ready?" he asked. I looked up at the granite facade, the American flag snapping sharply in the wind above it. "Yes," I said. "It's time." Inside the courtroom was packed. Reporters lined the back wall. Robert Klein sat in the front row, hands clasped tightly. Margaret Lawson sat beside her attorney posture, fragile but unbroken. And at the defense table sat Claire Cameron, Nathaniel Holloway, Dr. Russo, Richard Crane, and Victor Ashford, each flanked by federal marshals. They looked smaller now. Not powerful, not untouchable, just defendants. Today was sentencing. When the judge entered the room, fell silent. Victim statements were read first. Robert spoke of his mother's final months, confused, sedated, robbed of clarity and dignity. Margaret spoke of signing papers she could not read, of losing her home, of waking each night to memories of locked doors. Then it was my turn. I stood slowly and approached the podium. I did not look at Nathaniel first. I looked at Claire. For a moment I saw not the architect of my near destruction, but the little girl in my studio asking why broken things deserved second chances. Then the image dissolved. I was almost declared insane. I began evenly. Not because I was ill, but because I was profitable. The courtroom remained still. "You drugged me," I said, eyes shifting across the table. "You isolated me. You planned to strip away everything I built, and you believed I would never fight back." I let the silence stretch. "You underestimated me." I turned toward Claire. "You were my daughter," I said quietly. "I would have helped you if you had asked." Her shoulders trembled. "But you chose theft over trust." The judge later delivered sentence. Decades for Russo, decades for Nathaniel, substantial prison terms for Crane and Ashford. Cameron received less for cooperation. Claire's sentence landed somewhere between punishment and tragedy. As the marshals led them away, Claire looked back once. I did not wave. Outside the courthouse, reporters gathered. Ryan stayed at my side. "Justice," someone called out. "Do you feel justice was served?" I thought for a moment. "Yes," I said. But justice doesn't undo damage. It prevents the next one. The system that preyed on the elderly had been exposed, but vigilance would always be necessary. I walked down the courthouse steps beside my son, autumn air cool against my face. I had nearly lost everything. Instead, I had gained clarity. And today, I would face Claire one last time, not as a victim, but as a man who survived. Federal courtroom, Judge Patricia Coleman presiding. It was the moment I had both dreaded and waited for. The gallery was full long before the proceedings began. I sat in the front row beside Ryan, his hand steady on my shoulder. To my left sat Catherine Hayes, composed and resolute. Behind us were Robert Klein, Margaret Lawson in her wheelchair, and dozens of other victims and family members, people whose lives had been fractured by the machinery we had exposed. At the defense table sat all 6 defendants: Claire, Cameron, Nathaniel Holloway, Dr. Gerald Russo, Richard Crane, Victor Ashford. They had all entered guilty pleas. The evidence had left them no room to maneuver. Today was sentencing. Judge Patricia Coleman, silver-haired and sharp-eyed, surveyed the courtroom with controlled gravity. "We will now hear victim impact statements," she said. Margaret Lawson was first. A bailiff wheeled her forward. Though her body appeared fragile, her voice did not waver. My name is Margaret Lawson. I am 71 years old. 4 months at Evergreen Behavioral Center cost me $1.8 million, my home and my dignity. Her hands trembled slightly on the arms of her chair. I wake up some nights, convinced I'm still there, drugged, restrained, confused. These people stole my life. They deserve no mercy. She was wheeled back to her seat in silence, so heavy it seemed to press on the walls. Robert Klein stood next. His grief had aged him, but it had not broken him. My mother died at Evergreen, he said. She died believing she had lost her mind, but she hadn't. Her clarity was stolen from her. He turned and looked directly at Dr. Russo. Mr. Shaw fought back. My mother couldn't. So I asked this court to remember her, and the ones who never made it out. Catherine Hayes was third. She stood straight, shoulders squared. I watched my sister die in a facility just like Evergreen, she said. Elder abuse thrives in silence behind locked doors under the guise of protection. But abuse is not a private matter. It is a crime, and it must be punished as one. Then my name was called. I rose slowly. My legs felt heavier than they had in months, but I walked to the podium with purpose. I looked first at Claire. She would not meet my eyes. Your Honor, I began. My name is Henry Shaw. I am 67 years old. Not senile, not incompetent, not incapable, just 67. A quiet ripple moved through the room. For 42 years I restored damaged paintings. I believed that anything broken could be repaired, that if you worked carefully enough, patiently enough, you could bring beauty back from ruin. I paused. But I've learned something difficult. You cannot restore someone who does not want to be restored. I turned toward Claire again. My daughter orchestrated a plan to drug me, isolate me, falsify medical records, and imprison me in a psychiatric facility. She weaponized my grief over my late wife. She used my love as leverage. My voice steadied further. She did not simply steal money. She attempted to steal my identity, my autonomy, my sanity. I let the words settle. But this case is not just about me. I gestured gently toward Margaret and Robert. It is about every person who entered Evergreen, trusting it to provide care and left broken or not at all. It is about a system that treated older Americans as expendable. I straightened. We are not expendable. We are not burdens. We are not accounts to be emptied. We are people, and we deserve protection. I looked at Judge Coleman. I asked this court to send a clear message: elder abuse, whether by family or institution, will not be tolerated. I stepped back and returned to my seat. Ryan squeezed my hand firmly. Judge Coleman leaned forward. In my decades on this bench, she said, I have seen many forms of greed. Few have matched the cruelty displayed in this case. Her voice was precise, cutting. You turned medical care into a business model for exploitation. You corrupted professional trust. And you shattered families. She opened her sentencing file. Dr. Gerald Russo, you violated your oath and engaged in systematic fraud. I sentence you to 18 years in federal prison and permanent revocation of your medical license. Russo's face lost all color. Richard Crane. You facilitated fraudulent guardianships and forged documents. 12 years in federal prison. You are disbarred. Crane lowered his head. Victor Ashford. 10 years for conspiracy and trafficking in stolen property. Ashford stared straight ahead. Cameron Drake. You participated in a scheme to drug and defraud your father-in-law. 15 years in federal prison. Cameron closed his eyes. Nathaniel Holloway. The courtroom seemed to tighten. You have a documented pattern of exploiting the elderly. You conspired to defraud Mr. Shaw and discussed eliminating a co-conspirator. 22 years in federal prison. Nathaniel's jaw clenched, but he remained silent. Then Judge Coleman turned her attention to Claire. Claire Shaw. The room felt still. You were not coerced. You were not manipulated. Evidence shows you initiated this conspiracy. You betrayed your father, the man who raised you and trusted you. You exploited his grief and sought to imprison him for profit. Claire's shoulders began to shake. You have shown no meaningful remorse. The judge's voice did not soften. I sentence you to 24 years in federal prison. A broken sound escaped Claire's throat. No, please, Judge Coleman continued. All assets tied to this conspiracy are ordered seized and liquidated for restitution to victims. Evergreen Behavioral Center is permanently closed. Its remaining assets will be distributed accordingly. The gavel struck. It was done. Claire turned toward me, tears streaming freely now. Dad, I'm sorry. Please. I held her gaze briefly. There was nothing left to say. The marshals began escorting each defendant from the courtroom. Claire was last. At the doorway she paused, looking back one final time. Dad, please. I have nothing left to say, I told her quietly. Her face crumpled. The door closed behind her. Ryan wrapped his arm around my shoulders. Let's go home, he said. Outside, the autumn air was crisp and bright. Reporters called out questions, but I did not stop. Robert Klein shook my hand firmly. You gave them justice, he said. Margaret Lawson squeezed my arm with surprising strength. Catherine walked beside me toward Ryan's car. Justice had been delivered, the conspiracy dismantled, the predators sentenced. But as I settled into the passenger seat and watched the courthouse shrink in the rearview mirror, a deeper truth settled inside me. The life I had nearly lost, the quiet mornings, the attic studio, the simple dignity of autonomy had been restored, not because the damage never happened, but because I fought. Now at 67, my life was not ending. It was beginning again. The house on Hillcrest carried too many memories. 3 weeks after the sentencing, I walked through its empty rooms for the last time. The police had cleared out Claire and Cameron's belongings months earlier. The furniture was gone, the closets bare, the walls stripped of photographs. Only echoes remained. Helen's laughter drifting through the kitchen, Claire's small footsteps racing up the staircase, the quiet hum of the life we once believed was unbreakable. And beneath it all, the weight of betrayal pressed against the walls like dampness that would never quite dry. I stood in the center of the living room and let the silence settle. I couldn't heal here. A young couple bought the house. They arrived one afternoon with 2 small children and a kind of hopeful energy I remembered from years ago. The husband measured windows while the little boy ran circles across the hardwood floor. The wife lingered in the living room, sunlight catching in her hair. This house has such character, she said, smiling at the crown molding and wide archways. It was my wife's dream home, I told her gently. Take good care of it. She promised she would. Before I handed over the keys, I removed the last piece of the past that belonged to me. I climbed a small ladder and carefully lifted Helen's portrait from its hook. With steady hands, I unscrewed the tiny camera hidden behind her painted left eye. The device that had recorded betrayal, exposed corruption, and ultimately saved my life. I held the camera in my palm for a moment. It had once been my lifeline. Now it was simply a reminder. I no longer needed it, but I kept the painting. Ryan helped me move into a smaller 2-bedroom apartment, closer to his home. It wasn't grand, but it was filled with light. One bedroom became my studio, brighter than the attic had ever been, with tall windows that flooded the room each morning. Helen's portrait hung in the living room once more, watching over the space, not as surveillance, but as memory. Robert Klein visited about a month later. We sat at my small kitchen table, coffee steaming between us. He looked different, lighter, as though a weight he had carried for years had finally shifted. Because of you, he said, gripping his mug, my mother's estate is being partially restored. Not everything, but enough to matter. I nodded. I wish it had happened sooner. So do I, he said quietly. Then he leaned forward. I'm starting a foundation in her name for victims of elder abuse, legal aid, financial recovery, advocacy. I want to help others before it's too late. He met my eyes. Will you join the board? A warmth spread through my chest, slow and steady. It would be an honor, I said. Margaret Lawson sent me a card soon after. You gave me back my life, it read. I'm 71. Not done yet. Time to live again. Evergreen Behavioral Center was demolished within months. Federal authorities seized the property. The remaining patients, 28 of them, were transferred to legitimate care facilities. Many, freed from the heavy sedatives, regained clarity with startling speed. Families wept as parents and grandparents returned to themselves. The land was sold, and the proceeds were directed into a restitution fund. The machine that had devoured dignity for profit was gone. In its place, something better began to grow. I found a new rhythm to my days. I volunteered at the local community center, teaching art restoration workshops for seniors. I offered free restoration services to families who couldn't afford them, especially those rebuilding after financial or emotional trauma. I also began speaking publicly, town halls, senior centers, advocacy panels. You're never too old to fight back, I told them. And I meant every word. I spent more time with Ryan's children. Emma, My 9-year-old granddaughter loved to sit beside me in the studio. One afternoon, she watched intently as I worked on a cracked landscape painting. "Grandpa," she asked, "why do you fix old paintings?" I set down my brush and considered her question. "Because broken things still have value," I said. "Sometimes they just need patience. And someone who cares enough to do the work." She thought about that. "Like people?" she asked. "Yes," I said softly. "Like people." A year after the trial, December 2025, a postcard arrived. Ryan had stopped by with the mail. I was alone in my studio when I saw the return address: Federal Correctional Institution, Danbury, from Claire. I held the postcard for a long time before turning it over. "Dad," it began, "I know you may not read this, but I need to say it. I'm sorry. I was greedy, selfish, and cruel. Prison gives you too much time to think about what you destroyed. I don't expect forgiveness. I don't deserve it. But I remember everything you taught me about second chances, about restoring broken things. I'm trying to fix myself. It may take 24 years. It may take a lifetime, but I'm trying. I love you. I always loved you. I just forgot how to show it." I read it once, then again, then a third time. Part of me wanted to tear it in half, to erase the reminder, to protect myself from reopening wounds that had barely begun to scar. But another part, the father who had once swung her around the living room, who had guided her small hands across a paintbrush, felt something else. Not forgiveness, not yet, but recognition. She was trying. For now, that would have to be enough. I did not reply. Instead, I placed the postcard inside a small wooden box. In it were childhood photographs of Claire, drawings she had made when she was little crayon hearts and stick figures labeled Dad. I closed the lid gently. I am not ready to forgive, I told myself. But I am not ready to erase her entirely either. Time would decide the rest. Over the next year, life unfolded in ways I hadn't expected. I testified in 3 additional elder abuse cases. The foundation Robert and I helped establish assisted 15 families with legal resources and emergency financial aid. Margaret and I met for coffee, weekly sharing stories and laughter that felt hard-earned. I restored 23 paintings that year, all donated or belonging to families who had endured loss. My relationship with Ryan deepened in ways I never imagined possible. We spoke openly now, without hesitation. My grandchildren filled my apartment with noise and questions and warmth. One evening, Ryan arrived with Emma and her younger brother. Grandpa, Emma called, bursting into the studio. "I wrote an essay about you. About me, I laughed. What did you say?" She handed me a folded paper. "It's about courage," she explained. "My teacher said courage isn't not being afraid. It's being afraid and doing the right thing anyway." I said, "That's what you did." My throat tightened unexpectedly. "Your teacher is very wise," I told her. Ryan rested a hand on my shoulder. "You okay, Dad?" I nodded, emotion settling into something steady and clear. "I'm more than okay," I said. "For the first time in a long while, I'm truly happy." Later that night, after the children had gone home and the apartment was quiet again, I stood alone in my studio. Sunlight filtered through the window, warm against the floor. Helen's portrait gazed at me with the same calm strength it always had. I picked up my brush. "We made it through," I whispered softly. "We're still here." I returned to the canvas before me and continued painting. I am 68 years old now, not ancient, not fragile, not defined by what was nearly taken from me, just 68. And I have learned this: broken things can heal, damaged art can be restored, trust may not return in the same form, but it can grow again in new soil. Time moves forward, and so do I. If you've stayed with me until this moment, let me leave you with something that took me 68 years to truly understand. This family story began with love, trust, and shared memories. But it unfolded into something darker, a painful lesson about family betrayal. I learned that blood does not automatically guarantee loyalty. Sometimes the deepest wounds come from the hands we once held. Yet even in the face of family betrayal, you do not surrender. You do not shrink. You do not quietly accept injustice. I survived because I refused to become a victim. And I discovered something even more important: Dad revenge is not about rage. It is not about destruction. It is about justice. It is about standing tall when the world expects you to bow your head. My dad revenge was not fueled by bitterness. It was driven by protection. I fought not only for myself, but for 50 other families whose own family betrayal left them voiceless. Looking back on this family story, I see my mistakes clearly. I should have asked for help sooner. I should have trusted Ryan earlier. I should have spoken up the moment something felt wrong. If you take anything from this family story, let it be this: do not wait until you are cornered. Do not let pride, shame, or fear silence you. God gave me strength when I believed I had none left. He placed Catherine, Robert, Margaret, and Ryan in my path at exactly the right time. And I have come to believe that broken things can heal, not because they return to what they were, but because they endure. To anyone who feels trapped, forgotten, or invisible after family betrayal, you are not too old, too weak, or too broken to fight back. Your voice matters. Your life matters. This family story, my dad, revenge is no longer just mine. It belongs to every person who has ever been underestimated and refused to stay down. If this journey moved, you share it. Tell your story. Let others know they are not alone. Subscribe so these stories can reach those who need them most. Together, we can bring light into places that have lived in darkness for far too long. Thank you for walking this road with me until the very end. Disclaimer: this narrative contains fictionalized elements created for educational and awareness purposes. If this content is not suitable for you, please feel free to explore other stories that better match your preferences.